It's going to be author Thomas Henry Horan versus Druzer of the Citizen Detective podcast. We're going to be probably talking the myth. One second, guys. Yeah, we got the delay again, guys, per typical StreamYard.
Okay.
So let's see. I think right. No, it's like, all right, guys, we're gonna be right back. Sorry about this. It's a StreamYard thing. We'll be back.
That's live streaming. Yeah. That's just, it's always something. It's an adventure.
It's always so. As you can see, everyone's here. Everyone's here. It's just the platform not agreeing with us, guys. Yeah, we're gonna come right back, guys. Back on this channel. We'll be right back.
You guys should do live TV. We'd have a whole crew going crazy because, and shows like Saturday Night Live, they make a big deal out of it. People at home don't know why, but if you've ever tried to do live TV, this is what happens.
Yeah. I have a documentary background, so I have, I've been through some uncomfortable things. Lots of stress.
Well, I'm here. If my listeners are listening, I'm here. First, it was me. First, I had a problem. And now, Ross is having a problem on his end, but that should not be affecting us. I guess I could look at let me look at chat. I'm streaming, right? But all you guys see is a blank screen. Can you hear me? Hi, Creepy Crawl. Ross is having a problem on his end, so I can't, my camera's dedicated to StreamYard right now. Hi, Evie. So we're waiting on Ross to get things going again on his end. It happened to me first, but that's before I started my stream. So far, mine looks pretty stable. Yeah, okay. That seems to be working. Hi, John. Yeah, Ross said they've been having trouble with it. Either they get echoes or they get, like he's getting a really bad lag. You can't see me because my camera is dedicated to StreamYard and I don't want to turn it off. Oh, okay, John. Today's premium episode was not quite up to the same level. But it's because of all that crap about Simic. So, plus I knew I was going to do this later. Plus we're experimenting multi-streaming. This is going out to Ross's YouTube as well as to mine, as well as to my Facebook shitter. Premium channel. Druzer says he's listened to a lot of podcasts about Zodiac, so I'm like, well, you should have read my book. Because they always will put words in my mouth and people will believe them. And that's a terrible, terrible mistake. Boop, 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 boop. I can have my scalp. But he's going to run into the same problem Morph had. He didn't bother reading my book. And he's got all the wrong facts in his head. He's got them all the wrong facts he's got memorized. All the myth out of Graysmith's book, in every movie, every documentary, he's got it all memorized. Whereas I have the actual reports, which anybody can read. Maybe I should check my email. I need about 5 more devices. New link? Okay. Give me a minute. Okay, here we go. I got to go to a new link. Close this tab, go back here, go back to inbox. Inbox. Here we go. Entering the studio. Should be working. Enter studio.
Fucking like it really. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Okay, there we go.
All right, yeah, it's crazy, guys, because when we're in here, audio is fine. I go live and I get the fucking echo. That's why I warned you, Prof, because you know what I mean.
Okay.
I had a sneaking suspicion. I have echo cancellation on. Fuck, I'm telling you, it's fucking StreamYard, bastards.
Probably. Right. Some of my viewers said that StreamYard's having trouble, especially with YouTube lately. So, a lot of people are having trouble with it. So, okay.
Yeah, it's got to be it. All right, boys, let's give it another try. Same shit. It's just better off if I go in solo because it fucks up. At least I'll know. All right, we're 10 minutes late, but that's okay. It's PXF. Welcome to the channel, folks. We are live. No, it is not canceled. So go reshare the link back to everybody who is just watching. Had a slight technical difficulty, but that's StreamYard. That's PXF. So anyway, what brings us here today? Well, it's the debate series, Volume 2. Author Thomas Henry Horan, author of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, and Druzer of Citizen Detective Podcast. Of course, this is Volume 2. I'm going to prioritize super chats, so check those super chats out. Please subscribe. Zodiac Files Episode 4 is coming soon. But in the meantime, what you all came here for, yeah, that's right. It is the charm. So, without further ado, we have our contestants. The gentleman, Druzer of Citizen Podcast, fighting in the top corner, fighting in the bottom corner, and the professor, Thomas Henry Horan, author of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer. Check out The Myth of the Zodiac on Peacock. And so I thought we would kind of launch off on the canonicals, guys, unless you have starting points or you have something specific you want to go with. Or
I'd just like to start by thanking you for this great series. I've loved all the stuff you've done. It's you're a great new voice in in the community. We all really appreciate you.
Thanks.
Well, maybe not Ray Grant, but everyone other than him.
That's good. No,
and thank you, Professor, for coming on and talking to someone you don't even know.
Anytime, especially if somebody else is doing all the work like tonight. I'll be on anybody's podcast. I'll go on your podcast anytime.
Nice.
Yeah, nice. That'd be interesting. I'd like to see that.
Yeah. And I'm finally going to start having some live guests on. So maybe we'll have you on. Well, me and Drew Beeson, right? You know who that is.
Oh yeah.
And Ross and sometimes Ned. We kind of get together. Maybe he can be one of the wingmen.
I was going to suggest that.
See how that goes tonight.
Sure.
Okay, good. Well, I'm ready when you guys are.
Druzer could be the voice of reason, and he could press you on it. Well, give it up to Druzer, guys, because there was the first positive feedback I ever got on the show. Because if you look at the comments, man, they do. I think Tom's audience, they don't mind me, but some of the other ones, they're not big fans of me here at PXF. But that's why we all get together here, right? Neutral ground. So
it is a crazy case.
Appreciate it.
There's nothing certain. That's why we have so many theories. From really smart guys like the Professor and Ray Grant, who's crazy smart. No one agrees with either of you, but there is so many uncertainties in this case that just about anything is possible. So I remain pretty open-minded.
Well, and here's the thing. Now, Druzer admitted he hasn't read the book, and everybody knows that's a fatal mistake. But did you see have you seen the documentary? It was on Peacock. It's been on.
Yeah.
So what they did was, just so you know, I'm trying to give you a little bit of warning here. That's like chapter 2. They all read my book. Then they went out and talked to people, and, did follow up and things like that. So you haven't seen that in that You haven't seen this in the documentary either. The point is, all the theories you've ever read, every movie you've ever seen, every documentary, it's all based on Graysmith's book. The problem is Graysmith lied relentlessly. When you read the actual case files, the actual autopsy reports, what the witnesses really said, they tell a totally different story from the story people are used to seeing, like Fincher's movie and all these others. It's a totally different story, and people aren't aware of that. And so I'm going to leave it up to Druzer. Do you have a question? If you don't know what my theory is, let me explain the theory. Here's another problem. People like Tom Voigt, Mike Morford, they put words in my mouth and then prove those wrong. Okay. And that's a trap a lot of people fall into. So here's the basic thing. There is zero evidence of any kind that connects any two of these murders at all. Supposedly the letters do, but that's the letters actually prove that they don't. The second thing is the letters contain information that the actual killers, there's more than one, would not have known or could not have known. Only someone reading the actual police reports could have known some of the information, because some of it, for one thing, is wrong in the letters. The third thing is, in real life, there were very solid suspects in each murder, but not one of those suspects can fit all the murders, let alone writing the letters. So, and last but not least, when I say the letters were a hoax, I don't mean they were a joke or a prank.
No.
There's something much more serious going on here, and there's more than one person writing the letters. So
they're evil any way you look at it. You'd agree with that?
Well, the letters...
Writing these letters is just pure evil, terrorizing these communities.
That's the word right there. The character of the Zodiac is not a serial killer. He's a terrorist. And today he would be facing specific terrorism charges. So I think that's more important than his role as a comic book serial killer. He's a terrorist. And he's disrupting law enforcement. The threat to wipe out a school bus, every cop in the area had to, they couldn't solve crimes because they have to ride the school buses, follow the school buses. So this is, it was not a joke. There's nothing funny about it. But it turned out to be, when I identified the guy who actually started writing the letters, He's the guy with the World War II jungle fighting experience and the death cults and the building of the roadside bombs and the cryptology and all of that stuff. Which
Yeah,
I
and the
haven't.
spotless many-decade profession in law enforcement. He was.
Oh,
he was.
right.
He was like, you think Snook is evil.
Well,
right?
people have. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. One of the things the letters do is call attention to police corruption, and they actually call attention to it really loudly. But
not that the public could understand from the letters.
But
That was not conveyed.
Well, but there's a lot more. Like, for example, I asked a profiler, I said, would you say this person is a narcissistic underachiever, or would you say they're a sociopath? And she said, well, he never once expresses anything that would indicate he has the slightest bit of sympathy for the victims' families, or, he's completely ruthless. And that's not an underachiever. That's a sociopath. So, and it turns out, and see, this is all the evidence I haven't published or broadcast yet because I promised NBC they would get first crack at it, is that this case really does tie into Manson. It does tie into Son of Sam. It does tie into Patty Hearst. It does tie into all of these other cases, like specific people. Like the victims in the Zodiac case, you don't see an immediate connection between any of these kids.
Because they're random.
No.
Okay.
Their parents are the ones who are connected. And it's the connection between the parents that explains the motive for the murders and the motive for writing the letters. And see, this is stuff now, nobody knows this stuff. I've been sitting on it because I've been waiting for NBC to decide what they're going to use and what they're not going to use. So that's a big part of it too. But none of that makes any sense until you realize. So pick a murder, any murder. You tell me what you think happened, and we'll take a look at the documents and see what they say actually happened. We could. That's one idea.
I like
Sure.
it. So, okay. So a few things there because you unpacked a lot, Prof. But if I'm able to present this, I know what Druzer's gonna say, and I would like to. Well, anyway, I was thinking we would start with Lake Herman Road.
Okay.
But I do want to see. Why is it not coming up? Let me see. I have an article here. Let me see if I can. Why was this working before and it's not working now? There it is. Okay. Let's see. Does this work if we share this? Can you see this, gents?
Yeah.
Okay. So regarding what you just said, Prof, and I know Creepy Crawl thinks I'm biased, so check me in the comments, guys, if I remain biased at any point. Anyway, Prof's been on with me before, so he knows what's up. Johnson said preliminary analysis of partial fingerprints obtained from crime scenes in Napa County, Vallejo, and San Francisco indicated they came from the same man.
Right.
But he said the prints were not complete enough for identification of the killer.
Right.
So are you disagreeing with that assessment, Prof?
Well, that's two lies. Now, the question is, did Tom Johnson come up with the lie on his own, or was he told the lies? Because in real life, the next day, was it the day after his press conference? Tom Johnson was not a cop. Tom Johnson was a politician. So he said that. But the FBI report says, number one, the fingerprints you sent in are perfectly good for identification purposes, and there is no match. So where did Tom Johnson get the idea that they were a potential match? He was not a cop. He was certainly not a fingerprint guy. He never did anything in the lab. He was more of a politician. He's the political side of the sheriff's office, and there's the sheriff is a cop. Tom Johnson was under sheriff. He was the public relations guy for the sheriff's department. Well, Napa had their own fingerprint expert, Hal Snook. And Hal Snook, that report from the FBI that said there was no match, it's addressed attention Deputy Snook. So I think the logical explanation is it's Snook lying to Johnson to get Johnson to lie to the media, not Johnson making up that lie on his own. But it turns out, according to the FBI, number one, those fingerprints were all useful for identification purposes, and number two, none of them matched. None of them. So there we have law enforcement giving a press conference, making claims that are not true, that make the Zodiac look more real than he actually is.
Do you buy this article, Druzer? Partial fingerprints matching.
No, I don't. I've seen similar. I've seen a report saying there is a similarity, which is not how you speak of these things. There is a similarity between fingerprint on the little list letter and I don't know whether it was something from the cab or not.
Now
But at
that's
any
different.
rate,
That's different. Right. That's different from the ones that Tom Johnson is talking about. The ones Druzer's talking about is there's a partial pinky print from the cab. Now, this is where Graysmith distorts this, Tom Voigt distorts this. No fingerprints were found on the post between the front and back door driver's side of the cab. The fingerprints were found, the front door, the window was rolled down, and the fingerprints and palm prints were of a hand that wrapped around the door frame, of a left hand. Apparently, the person reached in and grabbed something out of the cab because his fingers went over dried tiny droplets of Stein's blood. That pinky fingerprint is not complete, but it does seem to line up with a partial pinky print from the little list letter.
Are you saying that there was blood on the inside of that door handle
Not the
panel,
handle.
and that's how you know
the post.
that's
the door,
how you know that the window was open?
the
Because
no,
that
the
wasn't
window
in the
front.
report.
Well, yeah, the window was rolled down. When the cops get there, the driver's side window is rolled down, and right, it's all the way down, and the fingerprints are on.
It's all the way up in the reports.
I'll print it up right now.
Okay. The window was down in the cab?
Yeah, the window was down, and the driver's window was down. That's important, and that's
It would be, yeah.
right. See, that's where it's not your fault. You've
But
been
Druzer
lied
disagrees
to.
with the report, Prof.
But he was misinformed by about the contents of the report. That's the thing. That's my whole point. People have been lied to for 40 years by Robert Graysmith, and longer than that by the San Francisco Chronicle. In real life, that's not what those reports say. And the more you look into it, the more you realize that it's not a couple of mistakes. This is a point where these letters are not only terroristic threats and disrupting law enforcement, but they are twisting law enforcement investigations, because some law enforcement, not all of them, but some of them believed enough in Zodiac, they start clearing suspects because they don't fit the profile of Zodiac. And this is a good example.
There's two pages of documents in San Francisco. Was it on page 1 or 2 that it says the window's open?
Well, I'm trying to pull that up.
Were you misinformed by the documents, Druzer?
I don't see it. I've read them 1,000 times. There's only 2 pages.
He thinks
Stein
he's got
Files
a problem.
album. Here we go. Pelicetti's report. But the fingerprints were found wrapped around. You can see it in the photographs that they took of the fingerprints and where they dusted for prints. They're wrapped around the post of the window. Now, if the window was up, how did the killer put his fingers through the glass of the window without rolling the window down?
I haven't seen evidence of either of those things. Where do you see that there's fingerprints around the inside? Is this from a photo that you're talking?
And from the description of the FBI report on the fingerprints, because they sent those fingerprints to the. It's on the report, the San Francisco fingerprint tech. They towed the cab to the Hall of Justice and left it in the garage until 5:30 a.m. when these two guys came on duty, and they were the ones who dusted for print. So he describes it's partial palm print, partial, this part of the fingers, and partial pads of a left hand that is wrapped around the post of the window. The window is rolled down, or at least it was when they pulled the fingerprints off of it and when the guy left the fingerprints. And what's important is he says clearly, Graysmith claims they're fingerprints in blood. They're not. It says very clearly in the report that the dried blood droplets, and they're tiny ones, had already dried before the person wrapped their hand around the doorpost. So the suspect, let's see, upper torso, immediate search, unobstructed. Cracky responded with dog units. Next page. I'll try to share this when I find it.
Well, at any rate, I guess Pelicetti didn't think it was important to notice that the window was down.
Now, see, this is something that's not in my book. It turns out that Armin Pelicetti is a really, really, really fishy cop. It turns
I
out that
appreciate that you have law enforcement involved in the crimes in like every situation here.
yeah, you've got people. Hal Snook, when you look at Hal Snook's military records, academic records, his career as a newspaper publisher before he ever joins Napa law enforcement, when you put all of that together, you're looking at a first-round draft pick of the CIA. And
Prof, before we get into this, Prof. Okay, so
so then you have Armin Pelicetti. You have Armin Pelicetti, who's running interference for people like Philip Arthur Thompson on behalf of the feds. And Philip Arthur Thompson is running drugs and guns and money and people on behalf of the CIA. So there you have two law enforcement people connected to Zodiac who have direct connections to the CIA. Then you find out what the victim's parents. Now, Paul Stein is different. Paul Stein actually has a connection to the Golden State Killer case. But Paul Stein is the oldest victim. He's 29. The rest of the victims are late teens, early 20s, and their parents are all connected. And they're all connected through classified defense work. Some of them very specifically. So,
I mean, it makes a little bit of sense, Prof, because you could see it with Sherry Jo Bates, but also a lot of people would make the argument that a military profession was way more popular and common in the late 60s. You know what I mean? So the problem people have with the spider webbing of these unsubstantiated, conspiracies is that basically what Druzer was just saying, if you break down each one of these guys and they have this CIA spook connection, but you know what I mean? It like with Snook, yeah, I get it, because you broke down the vigilante journalism, you broke it down in the book. The other thing he breaks down in the book, Druzer, is the programming of the populace, if you will, through these psychopathic serial killer films, In Cold Blood, The Thrill Killers, the movie M. So Prof does get a lot of that stuff right in Zodiac World, but the thing, where people are going to say that it's becoming unhinged, Prof, is each one of these people being these CIA insiders and then nothing ever leaking. You know what I'm saying? If there's this many building blocks of the conspiracy.
They did leak.
Right.
They did leak.
Right, but it hasn't pointed back on any of these people. You're the only one fingering them. You know what I mean? Like I already know that's what Druzer was going to say.
Well, that's because I haven't had time to show everybody. I just barely begun. So getting back to the fingerprints, no fingerprints from any two crime scenes match. No fingerprints from any crime scene match any of the letters except, and here's the thing, when you look at the true sequence of events according to all these reports, there are reports from the sheriff's office, the evidence locker. We have the evidence list of all the evidence that's checked into the evidence locker at the Hall of Justice. So we know, that's one way that we know the police did not find Paul Stein's trip sheet, which is actually, it's a big manila envelope with just each trip. You log each trip on the envelope. At the end of the night, you put your money and credit card tickets in the envelope. You hand it in at the taxi company. Well, they didn't find that. And a second way we know that is the police they looked at the numbers on his meter and tried to backtrack and calculate the approximate area where the cab had picked up the last fare. Well, if they have Paul Stein's trip sheet, then they don't need to do that. And the third reason we know that is there was that documentary made in the 90s where they go into the evidence locker, they take all the evidence out of the box. You've got the gloves, you've got the clothes, you've got everything. There is no trip sheet and no clipboard with the trip sheet on it. So it looks like the person who opened that door after Paul Stein was shot and a little bit of time after Paul Stein was shot because the blood had dried. They're tiny little blood droplets. Opened that door, did something with his right hand. Well, if he didn't reach in and grab the trip sheet off the dashboard, what did he do? Because the funny thing is, Keith Power publishes this article where he says the trip sheet said Paul Stein picked up his last fare in front of it's the address in front of the Pinecrest. Well, how did Keith Power get that information? If the cops didn't find the trip sheet, how did Keith Power know what was on it? And it's just, the whole case unravels really quickly when you look at the actual police reports.
There are tons of errors in the newspaper regarding this and all the other crimes.
Well, hold on.
I don't think a reporter makes up that there was a 38 used in the crime. They were told that. It was incorrect.
Exactly. So how did Keith Power get this in? Because this supposedly proves that the Zodiac is real once and for all. See, reporters like Paul Avery had been publishing articles debunking Zodiac letters, and that includes Paul Avery. But this article by Keith Power, and he got a byline on it, and he was their most sober, responsible reporter. He was not like Paul Avery at all. Had
Avery written about... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Did Paul Avery write about the Zodiac before Paul Stein?
Oh, yeah. He was writing articles debunking the Zodiac letters, saying they were bullshit. But
Do you have a date on that?
It's in my book. Let's see.
So real quick, guys, while you
I can tell you. Well, I can narrow it down because of this article by Keith Power. When Keith Power publishes this article, where he says that the trip sheet said that Paul Stein picked up the killer at Mason and Geary, which is right in front of the Pinecrest Diner, and that the stated destination was Washington and Maple, just like the Zodiac letter mistakenly said. That's supposed to prove Zodiac was right. But the question becomes, where did Keith Power get that information? Did he just lie about it to make the Zodiac look more real than he was? Or did Keith Power take that? Or did Paul Avery take it out of the cab after it got towed back to the Hall of Justice? Because it would have been super easy to do. Where did that information come from in that article? And I think it's really funny that Robert Graysmith, who worked with Keith Power at the Chronicle, he doesn't even mention that article in his book.
Yeah, and then there's the odd first wanted poster.
That's right.
Seemed to have information relating to earlier cab murders, not referencing the three teenagers who actually saw this going down. It's pretty strange.
So then the two detectives from the Zebra Squad who investigate the Zebra murders a couple years later, when those guys belonged to the exact same cult that's in the 408 Slaves in Paradise cult, they belonged to that cult. Nobody noticed. But those two cops took the sketch artist back to the kids, produced the second sketch that shows the scars on his neck and the blotches on his face, which there's a suspect with his mugshot. You can see all that very plainly. And why would Pellicetti fudge the description of the suspect? Well, then we find out that he's working for the CIA, running interference for certain suspects and getting them out of jail. So...
Let's use a response.
Tell me about the scars on the neck that weren't mentioned in the report or
you saw the sketch
poster.
Right? The second sketch, the second Paul Stein sketch.
Yes.
You see these scars on his neck, and you see the blotching on the cheeks and coming down the side of the neck. So
this is not mentioned. This highly identifiable mark is not mentioned in any police report.
Well, there's only one there's only one description of the suspect, and that was Pellicetti. Pellicetti wrote down what he said the kid said the killer looked like. Well, if he did a good job of that, why did the sketch artist have to go back and talk to the kids again? Because Pellicetti had fudged the description of the suspect to cover up for him.
To cover up for the suspect?
For the suspect. Pellicetti wasn't even supposed to be in that. Pellicetti, well, not so much corrupt. In his mind, he was part of something bigger. He ran interference for other CIA criminals like Philip Arthur Thompson. partner with John Gordon Abbott, Cabazon Arms, weapons. One of the crimes that Pelicetti covered up for this guy was the sadistic sexual murder of a girl. He stabbed her like 200 times with a penknife. That was Thompson's. Well, he's still alive. He's a convicted murderer.
Here's the thing, Prof. Like Druzer was saying, if this highly identifiable facial scarring existed for the Presidio Heights suspect, when we hear about this nonstop from Kathleen Johns that's supposedly sat next to supposedly the Zodiac. Now, I'm not saying that was the Zodiac, but if it had this I know you're saying it's a separate suspect in
it's
each
a different
incident.
guy. That's what it tells us, is it's a different guy. Because the suspect that I'm talking about, his mugshots, he's even wearing the parka-type jacket. He is described in police reports as being covered in scars from head to toe, and he was Vietnam combat veteran. Very, 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 very tough Vietnam combat veteran.
And why did the Robins not mention the scars? Or you're
They
saying
did.
they did to the
They
second?
did, right, but that didn't get published in that bulletin with, right, the description is not completely accurate, and that description was written by Armand Pelicetti.
And yet they put this authentic sketch.
Right,
You
because
know, the sketch shows
the kids
not lines
complained.
for the non-professional artist who was just sharpening his pencil.
No, those are scars.
Put that in there.
Those are scars. And you can also see the blotching, because this guy had really, really bad acne. And he had scar removal surgery, including the scars on his neck. And I happen to know what those blotches look like because I used to work in health insurance and medically necessary scar removal surgery. So you see the clearly delineated. He had liquid nitrogen, cryosurgery, and on that second sketch, you can see where he's very carefully erased those areas to leave those blotches, and he's got the scars on the side of his neck. And then in the mugshots I have of this guy, you see the scars in the neck, and you see the blotching in that second mugshot, which was taken a month after the Paul Stein shooting. You can clearly see he's tan. He's very tan from summer, but you see the blotching. And Pelicetti didn't mention those scars in his report, but they were important enough that two completely different detectives took the same police sketch artist back to talk to the kids, and he puts in the scars where they belong.
Okay, so Pelicetti puts in what the Robins said in the police report. He said he was a 40-year-old man.
No, he lied about
and all
that.
These other things.
Pelicetti lied. He fudged that version in his report to cover up for this guy.
Who was not 40.
Yeah, meaning what?
Oh, no. He was in his 20s. He was in his late 20s.
Yeah. Okay, so let me try to untangle this. The Robins realize that their information was not properly conveyed, or probably more likely their father.
When they see the sketch in the paper, that's right.
Right, so they sit for another sketch because, they wanted the guy 40 years old, and there were some other details wrong.
No. They wanted him younger. That's another thing. That's one of the reasons that the description changes a little bit on the poster. This was something I didn't have time to get into with Richard Grinnell. So if you look at that, so let's look at the report. Let's read his report really quick. This is what he said, the kid said. White male, American in his early 40s, 5'8", heavy build, reddish blonde crew-cut hair, wearing eyeglasses, dark brown trousers, dark navy blue parka jacket, and dark shoes. Should have many blood stains on his person and clothing. That's just an assumption. He didn't sit in the cab with the victim in his lap. He leaned over. And
Agreed.
so he didn't have blood all over him. See, that's another thing that Pelicetti fudges. But when you look at the poster, the very first one that came out October 13th, white male American, 25 to 30 years, 5'8" to 5'9", reddish brown hair, not reddish blonde hair, crew cut, heavy rim glasses, heavy blue or black jacket. So why is Pelicetti writing down a different description? And the only reason I'm saying Pelicetti lied is because I found two mugshots of a suspect who absolutely fits this crime and fits this description and fits this sketch, including the scars on his neck. And he was 27 or something at the time. So that's October 13th. This is a couple days after the murder. This is the first sketch. And the description that's published in the San Francisco Police Department is 25 to 30 years, 5'8" to 5'9", reddish brown hair. Then, on October the 18th, they come out with the amended drawing with the scars on the neck, and now it says 35 to 45, 5'8", heavy build, short brown hair, possibly with red tint. So they come up with this compromised description. And that's because, and coincidentally enough, Pelisetti turns out he's a part-time journalist. And it turns out he is running interference for certain suspects on behalf of the CIA, FBI, DEA. And one of the most notorious is Philip Arthur Thompson, who's also an accused serial killer.
Why did the Robins not take exception to them messing up the description even further?
Well, they did, but what could they do about it? I mean, they don't. One of them said,
it's a murder case.
Well, one of them said that when they saw Pelisetti pull up, they ran downstairs and ran outside and told him, there he goes. There he goes. You can still see him going up the street. And Pelisetti didn't go after the guy. He didn't. And Pelisetti, this is very convincing. There's a little confession in his interview on Fincher's documentary where he says, well, I was just scared. I was just scared to go up there. Well, why didn't you at least yell after the guy? Hey, come back here. I want to ask you a couple questions. You know, he knew that was the killer, but he decided not to go after him. That's a little hard to, that's hard to excuse.
There's some weird stuff. That the latest story from the Robbins family we should probably talk about as well. But the reason that the dispatcher got the incorrect description in the first place may be a similar circumstance to Pelisetti not hearing right away that the guy was down the street. Maybe that didn't even happen. But if the dispatch was screwed up because there was several kids cross-talking, and they just, the dispatcher obviously made a mistake. Even if they did hear something off, they should have confirmed the race of the description.
Well, now, what makes us think that the dispatcher made this mistake? Who said that?
Well, it was either them or the kids, and the kid said he was.
No. Who said the dispatcher said that? Who said the dispatcher put out an APB for a Negro male American? Who said that? There's only one source for that claim.
Falk and Pelisetti?
Well, Falk. Falk's memo said, well, the original dispatch said, but see, here's the thing, another thing Graysmith lies about. What really happened was Falk saw in the newspaper, he saw the bus bomb letter where he says 2 cops pulled a goof? And he said, well, if he's talking about me and Zelms, he's a goddamn liar. So he writes a memo to that effect. But he just assumed the letter was referring to him and Zelms. And Graysmith makes it sound like it's an established fact that he was. But in real life, one of the things Rodelli proved is the Zodiac, whoever wrote that letter, they're not talking about Fook and Zelms. They're talking about Pelisetti and Peda. They're the first ones to arrive at the scene.
That's not Rodelli's position on that. He interviewed Falk numerous times, and Falk is convinced that he saw the Zodiac. The timing makes sense.
But the problem is, the guy that Falk describes is completely different from the description that the kids gave. That's another problem. He describes a guy. Okay, let's go back. Let's read this again. 25.
Well, no, 20, the report says 40.
25.
And
no.
Said 35 to 40.
Here's the sketch. 25 to 30 years. 5'8" to 5'9", reddish brown hair, crew cut, heavy rim glasses. The guy Falk describes is closer to 5'10". He's closer to 40 years old. He has blonde, almost gray hair, and he's about 50 pounds heavier?
Why are you comparing it to the poster? Why are you comparing it to the poster? We have the initial report that came from the Robins.
You mean the initial report that doesn't know that comes from Pelisetti? It's Pelisetti's version of their description. Why? Okay, how did it get changed from Pelisetti's report to the October 13th poster? What's the source of that information?
I can only speculate. that it's
Well, it's
based on
obviously the
earlier cab
Robinses.
robbers.
It's obviously the Robinses.
It's not obvious because there's a conflict between the report and the poster. We can speculate about why they're different, but there's no conclusion.
The second thing is, Rodelli did show this. He showed this at I read it in his book or someplace, that it couldn't have been Falcon's Elms. They were too late to have seen, to be in the guy that's who in the letter says that two cops pulled a goof. The two cops who pulled the goof a slang word for corpse, that's Pelicetti and Peta. Those are the two cops who pulled the goof. They're the ones who were close enough that they supposedly may have seen the guy go by. And maybe they did talk to him. And maybe he did identify himself to Pelicetti and says, I'm out of here.
Because in your version, goof doesn't mean a mix-up. It means a dead body. And even though this directly parallels the experience of two police officers,
it doesn't directly parallel their experience because Fuchs clearly says, we saw a guy walk by. We didn't stop and talk to him. We didn't see any blood all over him. There's no reason to think that that guy was the shooter. There's no reason at all. He's too tall and too fat.
There is
no matter which
literally around the
description.
corner from the crime. He's literally around the corner.
Well, sort of, not exactly.
3-minute walk.
He's the only guy that came out of the
direction.
direction, Prof. So there is, but here's the thing: when you bring up scar tissue, Gary Francis Post fans are going to go crazy and say, "Yes, finally, we got our scars. The code breakers are right." You're familiar
They
with
got
this?
But
the
they
scars
get
are
the
in
one
wrong
on the
place for them.
forehead.
Yeah,
on the
right,
forehead.
exactly.
Yeah.
But they hear scars and yeah.
Yeah.
So if this is the case, Prof, what is your suspect's motive for the Paul Stein killing then? If it's not related to the canonicals and not related to the Zodiac letters, and he's got such a connection with Palisetti that he's going to let him off of the crime scene. And Palisetti and they're not the only cops there, by the way. There's also Fuchs and Zelms, and cops are about to swarm the neighborhood. So I don't really see why it's on Palisetti to solve it individually either, other than the fact that he's walking away in the background, because Falcon Zelms are right around the corner. You know what I mean? So,
well, just this one little tiny thing doesn't prove a lot. I understand that. But when you look at every single case and you look at every single page of the reports, it's the same thing. The witness descriptions are always very different from one case to another. There are no fingerprints that match from one crime scene to the next. If those fingerprints on that door post don't belong to the killer, well, who do they belong to? There must be somebody who tampered with the evidence. So,
this gets connected with the canonicals because it's the last Zodiac canonical. And what Druzer is about to say to you is that the biggest criticism of your book is obviously this murderer cuts off the portion of Paul Stein's shirt. Do you still have your suspect cutting the shirt and sending it in with the letters, or no? Because I know your book is kind of
as I explained in the book, it is 1,000% possible that someone got a piece of that shirt after the body had been removed from the cab. And if you look at the pattern of bloodstains, that's exactly what it looks like. So the question becomes, is that even possible? Could somebody get into, what they did is they took Paul Stein back to the Hall of Justice, they undressed him, took him to the morgue for an autopsy. Well, they took him to the morgue, undressed him. They took the clothes back to the lab and they spread it out on the counters, put the drying lamps on, because if you put that stuff away while it's wet, it'll mold. So while it's lying on the counter drying, anybody can walk into that room, see that there's a piece of shirt missing, get a bright idea, and tear off another piece of shirt. Because if you look at the shirt with all the pieces pinned back into place, you can see where apparently the killer did tear off a piece of his shirt. And that's what combat veterans are trained to do. You pull up the shirt tail because that's the cleanest part of the uniform, and you get your bandage from there. Maybe he just did it out of habit. Maybe he needed a rag, maybe out of a habit. Maybe he accidentally killed the guy, and now he's going to try to apply a bandage. We don't know. That piece of shirt has never been seen again, as far as anybody knows. But the 3 pieces of shirt that are mailed in with letters, they're torn off next. It's not one big piece and then he tears off more pieces of the shirt. You can take any piece of cloth, and this was a cotton poly blended cloth, so the warp threads, the vertical threads, are stronger than the weft threads. So if you tear off a piece of shirt like the killer did, like this, and you try to restart that same tear and go over again, you will see an unmistakable stair-stepping effect. And that's what you see when you see the shirt put back together. Those other 2 pieces of shirt were torn off seconds later, minutes later, hours later. We don't know that for sure. But if you look at the pattern of the bloodstains. Now, everybody says, oh, it would be impossible. If you watch the documentary, Duffy Jennings said, oh, there's no way a reporter would get access to that evidence. In real life, the Chronicle that fall was chock full of stories about that police precinct where the Hall of Justice was. Mass corruption, a burglary ring. Cops were participating in burglaries. They're away from their posts. They're tampering with evidence. This massive corruption investigation at that precinct. So it is possible. Last but not least, there was one other person alone with the body, and that was Pelicetti. Peta was going around the neighborhood, canvassing the neighbors. Pelicetti went to the cab to check to see if Stein was still alive. He was alone long enough to grab a couple pieces of the shirt. So it could have been done.
Was the one who went for the walk.
Well, hold on. If the according to his interview in Fincher's documentary, Pelicetti says he was alone with the corpse for a few minutes. So it's up to whether you decide whether you want to believe Pelicetti or not.
But this is different from what I understood your beliefs were.
I know.
That
That's not your fault. That's not your fault.
I didn't say it was. So you think that the killer did take a piece of shirt and then someone else took the rest of it? Is that
right?
Is that what I heard?
Apparently, because that large piece of shirt has never been found. Now, the two other pieces that were torn off sometime later, seconds, minutes, hours, one of those was then torn into two pieces. So if you look at the chronology of the letters coming into the Chronicle and coming into Melvin Belly, it's possible that and see, here's another problem. The Chronicle never once got their story straight about which letter contained which piece of shirt. Every time they told the story, they told it differently. That's not going to hold up in court. But whether it was the dripping pin card or the bus bomb letter, came with the second bloody piece of shirt. Graysmith is all alone with that material in the dark room. Graysmith could have torn off a piece of that shirt and stuck it in his pocket before he photographed it and handed it over to police, and then he hands it over to Melvin Belly or Paul Avery, who was Melvin Belly's publicist.
So hold on, Prof, because you did a lot there. So if it's maybe Graysmith or maybe Palisetti or maybe anybody in the morgue, why the consistency in Zodiac's handwriting then? Would you say that's a fair point, Druzer?
I would.
Well, this is where I actually have quite a bit of expertise, forgery and poison pen letters, altered handwriting. Now, I didn't put any of this in the book. I haven't done this. I haven't published any of this, but I can show you that 3 different hands wrote those letters. One obvious difference is between the letters and the cryptograms. Okay, that's 2 different hands. Maybe one right hand, maybe one left hand. But when you look at the letters, and actually when you look at the Melvin Belly letter, I can show you all 3 hands. There are 3 people writing these letters, as has been confirmed by the linguistics experts at the Sorbonne University on the documentary. It's more than
AI
one person.
Stuff?
Was
more
that
than AI linguistic analysis?
They're the guys.
That's what you're resting on?
I'm not resting on it. I said it corroborates what I show you with the handwriting. I can show you the same thing with the handwriting. Like, I'm
sorry if I look infuriated.
No. That's because you don't. This stuff is all catching you by surprise.
Mm-hmm. He's red pilling you. Prof, real quick, Cat Daddy Steve's pushing back on you. He says Palisetti was not alone. He had a group of kids intently watching the scene.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I didn't say he was alone with the corpse. They didn't gather around the taxi while they looked at the corpse. Now, I think it was.
They were there before he arrived.
I don't think Pelicetti, because if you look at the pattern of blood stains, those pieces of shirt were torn off the shirt after the body was removed from the cab. So I don't think Pelicetti could have done it. And I don't believe his story, because 50-year-old memories are worthless. So when you get any of those stories you hear in those, right, you got to take them with a grain of salt, because it was a long, long, long time ago. And especially when you've told your story 1,000 times like Pelicetti has. So I don't think it was Pelicetti. I think it was whoever took the trip sheet off the dashboard of the cab, went into the evidence room, saw that somebody had torn off a piece of the shirt and grabbed another piece of the shirt, or 2 more pieces of the shirt.
So you outlined it in the book. I like the angle you took, but Druzer, do you have any problem with the missing trip sheet? Does that mean anything to you? What's your angle on that?
Well, like we were saying, we only have basically 2 pages for this entire crime, and that seems
No, we also
odd.
have, you haven't seen there's a sheet of paper that goes with the evidence, including the Paul Stein's bloody clothes. All the evidence I got from the cab is written down on a form, and that goes with the evidence to the evidence locker. You haven't seen that form?
I don't know. I looked at the death certificate. There's a few little pieces, but
Yeah.
perhaps not.
You might not have seen that, and it's not on that form, and it's not in any when they in that documentary they take all the evidence out of the box. It's not in there either. Number 3, they had to calculate from the meter in the cab approximately where Paul Stein must have come from. So they obviously did not have.
Which they wouldn't have needed to do if they had the trip sheet.
That's right.
Now, I don't consider myself an expert in this case. I'm a student of it. I haven't been at it long enough, so I rely a lot on people who do claim to be experts. And
if you
claim
read
to
my book,
have spoken with, yeah,
based on nothing. Now this book is limited. No. It doesn't clear up everything. It takes Grace Smith's book, which everybody has used as their source, until Rodelli came along. Until Rodelli came along, it debunks that. Then there's the original academic book article I was writing about the history of vigilante journalism and how it predicted the rise. Blah 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 blah. You can skip.
Yeah, he did get that part right.
Do you know how offensive it is when you say that everyone in the Zodiac community is basing everything they know on Gray Smith's book, which has been known to be horseshit for 20 years?
Well,
I mean, he just means a lot of that trend of misinformation got pushed hard by Gray Smith, and thus it created the movie, so it created that narrative.
Every podcast, everybody,
the mainstream narrative.
Then in the last third of the book, I stick with the material that was available to Gray Smith when he wrote his book, which was the original files, none of this new stuff that I've dug up since then, and other people helped me dig up since then. Just using the same material that proves Gray Smith wrong, you reread that material, and it tells you what actually happened in each murder. Who the actual suspect was at the time. There were solid gold suspects in each murder at the time. Now, others have come to light. That's true. And that's what this book is about. And it stops right there. But there's all this other stuff I'm throwing at you. But what happens is every podcast everybody believes the myth because they haven't heard any differently. And Rodelli's theory is he pointed out a few of these things, like I said, but he was so focused on his suspect, the dog walker or whatever. But he's the guy who spent the thousands of hours and thousands of dollars getting the files. So we owe him a debt of gratitude for that. But those files tell a totally different story from the one people have heard. And it's every single one of these cases. Yeah. So, Paul Avery was writing articles debunking Zodiac letters until Keith Power published that article about the trip sheet, which was right before the conference, October 20th or something. Keith Power never wrote another word about it. I called him and asked him about it. He claimed he didn't remember. But the next day, you get Paul Avery, he's become Zodiac's publicist, and he also happens to be Melvin Belly's publicist. And lo and behold, Melvin Belly gets a letter complete with piece of bloody shirt from the Zodiac. What a coincidence. And you just see this stuff happen day after day, case after case, and begin to realize it's not just one little teeny tiny thing. It's you put all of them together and you realize this is
is this fair? There was a conspiracy to make this seemingly routine cab robbery part of the Zodiac myth. Is that correct?
Well, here's the thing. It's so different from all the other Zodiac murders. It's not a couple. He's the oldest victim. He did not randomly meet the killer at the random location. He drove the killer to the crime scene all the way across the city. This looks more like a very, very clean professional hit. The others looks amateurish.
I gotta jump in here, sir.
Okay.
Back to what I was saying to you before. This is PXF. I got to hold your feet to the fire.
Right.
Segueing off Druzer's response there. then why Paul Stein? Why a random cab driver? How? So you're essentially saying your suspect then is going to randomly pick a random cab driver in order to frame it as a Zodiac crime? Or you're saying if it's a targeted hit, then why even waste time with mailing in the piece of sheet with the shirt and make it related to the Zodiac canonical?
None of these murders were random. None of these murders were random. None of them were random. The Paul Stein is different because it's not about his parents. It is about him. He has a connection to the Golden State Killer case. He has, there are other things, you know, some of them are just rumors, but like his wife or he was getting his PhD. For example, there's a statistical probability he was Sherry Jo Bates's fiance's English teacher at San Francisco State. He was a PhD student. He was teaching English, teaching freshman English. And Sherry Jo Bates's fiance was a freshman at San Francisco State, would have been taking English at some point. So he could have been his teaching assistant. But that's not the big connection. The big connection is he's from Exeter, California, where the Golden State Killer is from. He was a cub reporter at the local newspaper covering the Visalia ransacker and all these other cases. One of the suspects in that case, now the Golden State Killer supposedly acted alone, but I'll get off that for a minute. But he supposedly tried to frame other people. And one of the guys he tried to frame was a man named Oscar Clifton, who was Paul Stein's best friend growing up. And Oscar Clifton did eventually murder his wife, but he was one of these guys who was framed by the Golden State Killer, and he happens to be Paul Stein's friend. And Paul Stein's becoming not just an investigative reporter, he's getting his PhD in journalism from San Francisco State. So if he has been uncovering things about San Francisco police corruption, which was rampant. You've seen the movie Bullet, right? It's the exact same time period. Toschi had five Hall of Fame actors play him in movies.
Yeah, that's based on Toschi, yeah.
So there's this possibility, I made a video about this, the code within the code in the 408. And the thing about the letters is they don't really prove that the guy writing the letters murdered anybody. But what if he predicted a murder? And this code within the code has a whole bunch of messages that might be explaining things like, I went to BRS to meet hippie victim's sister. Blah, 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 blah. Well, some of those messages, some of them are, this time I owe Pinecrest victim's shirt. We tie his Pinecrest victim's shirt to me. If those letters or cryptograms predicted a murder before it happened, now that would prove that the letter writer was really connected to something. And this group that we're talking about, Drew Beeson talking about D.B. Cooper being part of this underworld of mercenaries and spooks for hire. Mm-hmm. This is the exact same thing. They're proving what they can do. If he can predict a murder before it happens and pull it off. But the second motive is, I think that as Paul Stein being a reporter, it's not a random crime, because the victim, the shooter, if he is standing out in front of the Pinecrest Diner, and the victim said that he wiped off the rear driver's side door, so he must have gotten in on that door, then he would be standing in front of the Pinecrest. If that's true, he could see, there were lots of cabs swarming around the Pinecrest, but if the window's down, he could see Paul Stein. He could flag him down.
Yeah, so much there. There's so much.
Mm-hmm.
So
one of the things you snuck in there was that the Zodiac victims weren't random.
That's right. They're not random.
They all had plans to go elsewhere that night.
Well, according to who?
According to the survivors,
friends and family,
their friends and family, every single one of them.
And it turns out, and that we see the same thing. This is a really bad problem in Son of Sam. When the actual police reports came out, it turned out that the victims all lied to the police. And what we see in the Zodiac case is the victims don't necessarily know each other. They didn't necessarily know each other. Betty Lou Jensen didn't necessarily know Darlene Ferrin. She didn't necessarily know Sherry Jo Bates. There's no connection there. They don't go to the same school. They don't belong to the same clubs. There's no connection between the kids that you can see immediately. But when you find out what their parents do, they're all connected. Not just that they work in the same industry or belong to the same labor union or work in the same place doing the same job. You want to hear something really crazy?
I want to hear the logistics of how their parents have any bearing on where their kids ended up. The killer knows each of these different killers, but they all know these victims.
The organization would know, and you kill their kids you can't kill the person. They're too valuable. The mafia does this. I mean, the mafia does this all the time. It doesn't matter. Like the shooters don't always necessarily really care if the victims are dead or not. They're just sending a message. Darlene Ferrin did she have 10 brothers and sisters, 9 brothers and sisters? So sending a message to her parents, both her father and her mother, and her father-in-law.
Well, not a very clear message because everyone thought they were random.
Well, you don't go. If you're being threatened by the mafia and they get to your kids, what are you going to say? Well, the mafia did it. You get the message. You stop.
The Sunans were threatened by the mafia.
No, not by the mafia.
On that.
Not by the mafia necessarily, but by this the CIA. Well, the CIA does business with the mafia. They do business with the QLF. Yeah. The QLF does business with the KGB, who do business with the mafia. So they get the message. Now, here's the funny thing. Arthur Ferrin, electronic engineer at Mare Island, classified work. Leo Suennen, machinist, Shed X-58, Mare Island, that's working on nuclear submarines. And he's a machinist. Remember that. Sherry Jo Bates's father, machinist, starts with an O. It was the first. C. Corona Naval Laboratories in Riverside, where they make not only spy satellites, but they also make underwater cameras and things for military submarines. He's a machinist there. Jim Phillips Crabtree's brother Otis was a machinist at Corona Naval Laboratories. Did you know that?
I did, from you.
So then on top of that, let me expand on this a little. This is why Leo Suennen works on classified nuclear submarines as a machinist at the Navy Yard. You've heard of Kenneth Bianchi, one of the Hillside Stranglers, right? Mm-hmm. From Rochester, New York. How could there possibly be a connection between Kenneth Bianchi and Darlene Suennen? Kenneth Bianchi's adopted father, Mr. Bianchi, was a machinist at a company called, nothing could be more boring, the American Brake Shoe Corporation. They manufactured brake shoes for railroads. But they also, since 1928, they took on this work. They hired these genius metallurgists. They developed these high-tech, high-temperature, non-metallic metal alloys, which are used on nuclear submarines. And they make components of this stuff. And so if Leo Suennen is a machinist at Mare Island repairing these submarines and using some of these pieces, he has to be trained on how to fix these pieces. So he travels to Rochester, New York, and Mr. Bianchi teaches him how to do it. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We already know that the Rosenbergs already worked with an established network of machinists and draftsmen all through the defense industry. They went to the gas chamber without naming any names. The only other one they caught, if I remember correctly, was Ethel's brother, who worked at Los Alamos. They had a network of these machinists all across the country. So it isn't just the Zodiac case where it's not the kids that are related. And you see the same thing in Son of Sam.
I gotta refocus us, Prof. I feel it, but so it's your position that Paul Stein is targeted because he is a reporter uncovering police corruption.
And possibly knows something about the Golden State Killer that they don't want to get out either. Because he obviously didn't act alone either, and he's a cop.
Now, Paul Stein wasn't scheduled to work that night.
Okay, right.
how did any killer know?
How they? Oh,
where
well,
to
he's
find
saying
him?
he was sitting outside the restaurant. He visually ID'd him.
Well, it
sitting
could
outside
like you're
So he
you're
just got lucky.
well, you're assuming
That's
that
how it sounded.
the murder had to take place October 11th. If they know this guy's a problem, if they know this guy's a leaky pipe and they want to stop the leak, well, maybe it takes a couple weeks. Maybe it takes a couple weeks to
Okay.
get to the guy. Maybe it could take. I think there is a lot to this relationship between Paul Stein, the reporter, and what's his name, Gaikowski, the underground newspaper reporter. See, there's another connection to Crabtree because they both worked in the same building in Albany, New York, before Gaikowski moved to the Bay Area. So there's a very good possibility that Paul Stein knew Gaikowski or whatever. So there are ways, because Stein really plugged himself in. They rented that house on the north side of the Panhandle that was really close to it was really close to Charlie and Mary Bruner, by the way. Well, it was, and like the switchboard was like, it wasn't the switchboard for that paper, Gaikowski's paper. It was
several papers.
It was a community switchboard.
And it used to be where the diggers.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And Crabtree.
So strangely, Crabtree worked in two places that at one point or another, Gaikowski also did. I've always found that bizarre.
Well, Crabtree's always dropping hints he's some kind of CIA operative, right? Well, why wouldn't he be Operation Chaos? Why wouldn't he be Operation COINTELPRO? You saw where he lived in the Haight, right? Like he lived in a very central location. The addresses, have you looked at the addresses in Jim and Darlene's address book? You see how many friends they have that live around the Presidio, and you see he knows Roz Herkimer. He knows these people in Albany. See, there's a lot of that stuff that I've been talking about you guys don't know about either. So, yes,
I actually do. And you have actually spoken at length with my brother, Adam.
Oh, okay. Cool. Very cool.
Yeah, so he's done tons of work on Crabtree several years ago, and it was one of the reasons why I got interested in the case, and it was certainly one of the reasons why I got interested in what you had to say.
Did you know? I don't think even Ross knows this. You know that picture of Darlene supposedly with Gaikowski, the unknown man. You've seen that picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Supposed to be the doctor with the surgeon.
Well, he looks a lot like Jim Crabtree. Crabtree says it's not me, it's a guy who looked like me, but he's older than he looks in the picture. Well, guess what? That's Jim's older brother Otis, described to a T. Now, what's interesting about that photograph is, and there's a picture of him with a mustache when he's in the Navy. I think there's a very good chance it is Otis. And Crabtree was known to sponge off of his brothers. Well, he and Darlene come back from their trip out east in mid-October 1966. He's not allowed to stay at the Suennen house. They can't stand him. So we know he's staying with one of his brothers. One brother lives in Reno, one brother lives in Reading, and one brother lives in Riverside. And he's a machinist.
He actually did stay with the Suennens for 3 weeks.
But not when they came back from the trip out east in October. So anyway, he has a place to stay in Riverside the week that Sherry Jo Bates is killed. And his brother does the same job as Sherry Jo Bates' father. Now, that's not the only murder that we can link Jim Crabtree to. There's another murder that happens on the Presidio grounds at that bar. There was that enlisted men's bar where this girl left the bar and she's found murdered. And if you go right straight down that street, you come to one of the houses that's in Crabtree's address book. And Crabtree was in town for that. Was that August of 67? I don't remember the date off the top of my head, but him and Darlene are traveling, coming back. Well, he's in town for that murder. There's a murder down in San Diego. He has a cousin in San Diego. He's in town and there's a murder like a block away or something. He's in town for that murder. But that house where that picture was taken, I don't care if it's Gaikowski, I don't care if it's Jim, I don't care if it's Otis. We have identified that house. There is zero doubt about it. That house was owned, maybe it was rented by a doctor, but that house was owned by a paperclip Nazi named Horst Heinz Eifler. And his brother had a house in the same neighborhood. And Darlene's uncle, Frank Kosciuszko did have a house on the same street, but that's not the house where that picture was taken. That picture was taken in Eifler's house. And what's interesting about that is the IHOP where Darlene worked when she split with Jim and got with Dean, that IHOP was owned by a paperclip Nazi. Well, his father was a Nazi, and he was a Hitler Youth Nazi. He grew up in Germany, and they owned that IHOP. So when I say it probably involves these spy networks, Betty Lou Jensen's dad, chemical weapons. Darlene's mother worked for a pipeline company. Also, when I say chemical weapons, we're talking like napalm, stuff like that. So all this stuff I've been bottling in for years. Tonight's the first night anybody's hearing any of this. And Druzer gets to hear it.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm a big paperclip fan, Prof. But here's the thing: like, I don't know what your position on Riverside is. I think we talked about it before, Druzer. I don't see any direct connection between the Zodiac canonicals and Riverside at this time, other than some similar type, letter writing. So I could see how that could.
Parents.
Well,
and Paul Avery.
I hate you, Druzer.
Paul Avery, Paul Avery's
yeah.
the source for this connection, but then it turns out that Jim's brother apparently works with Sherry Joe Bates' father. So,
but
Avery was not the source of the connection.
Yeah, he got a tip that I don't know when.
There's the Don Chaney stuff.
Established.
Sure. Now I'm way behind on Drew Beeson's work on Chaney and Avery, but you see how all of a sudden it fits in, and I've told him this. It actually fits in with what I've been doing. It's just that what I've been doing goes way beyond this book. But you have to look at this. And here's the thing. Each individual case, maybe it's not that big of a deal, the stuff I'm noticing. But when you total it all up, and then you have this supposedly unsolvable crime, and the guy who wrote the letters should have worked for the CIA, but he's not at CIA. He was Civil Air Patrol. He was now I'm going to go really crazy here on you guys. You guys don't know this either. Those recently declassified JFK files. You know that apparently Oswald, when he lived in Russia, he worked at the Geraci plant, which was Minsk was the Soviet Union's Silicon Valley, and he worked at Minsk Radio, and apparently he worked in the Geraci division, where they manufactured sophisticated electronics for missiles and spy satellites. Now, my question is, how did he get that job? Because he went straight from the Marine Corps. A week later, he's on a plane to Russia. Like he goes as fast as he can. His military records show that he was only trained as what's called a scope dope, which is you're not trained in how to build the radar, you're not trained in the physics of it, you're only trained in how to operate it and make certain notes and make certain phone calls. That's all he was trained to do. But how did he convince the Russians that he was qualified to work at that plant? Unless he got training on the sly. And where did he get that training? Was it from people like Leo Suenin? Was it from people like Sherry Joe Bates' dad? Were these kids killed to warn them to keep their mouths shut about what they knew about Oswald? Because this is just about the time when it's Mae Brussel and these people are starting to point out holes in the lone killer theory and JFK. And just about that time, you get this series of murders with people who were either at least approached by the Rosenberg, and that spider ring had been going on long before. The Rosenberg's boss at the Signal Corps Laboratories was a paperclip Nazi who practically invented the cameras that you and I are using right now.
I gotta refocus us, Prophet. I love JFK, and I don't know. I'd be pretty surprised if that was the connection there, to be honest with you. But going back to what Grinnell is going to say here earlier. Saying things are possible is not proof of anything. Claims must be backed up with evidence.
That's what I've been doing. That's what you need to watch my podcast for.
No, I
got the evidence.
If you can convince us that that these victims were followed to the locations, even though the killer waited several minutes, sometimes an hour, twice an hour before
how do you know
striking.
That? Well, okay, so then he has plenty of time to find him, doesn't he? Now, the Lake Berryessa attack, as I show in my book, there's no evidence that that's a Zodiac crime. That could easily be a copycat. And there's a suspect.
It's a little unlikely.
Oh, no, it isn't. It's perfectly likely because there's a suspect Listen. What? Oh, you tell me what rules out the possibility of a copycat. These are the two things. It's Paul Stein's bloody shirt and the writing on the car door at Berryessa. You tell me what proves that it's the same person writing the letters. Let alone, don't worry about proving it's the same person who killed Paul Stein. Don't try to prove it's the same person who killed Betty Lou Jensen and Sherry Jo Bates. Don't even try to do that. Just prove to me, what is it that you think proves that the killer at Lake Berryessa was the same person writing the letters? How did he prove that?
Go ahead, Druzer.
Well, I don't think there is. You can say handwriting, which isn't 100%.
And it doesn't. It really does. And first of all, that report doesn't exist. There's no report from Sherwood Morrill saying that he thinks it's the same person. There's a report where they send it off to him, but they don't get a report back from Sherwood Morrill. And the thing
As
about
I said
it
at the
is,
beginning of this, there's so many questions, so many uncertainties. You can be 99% sure that an evidence locker wasn't broken into. You can assume that the guy who gives information that only the killer and police would know, who claims to be the killer, you can say he's probably the killer. These are assumptions.
well, hold on. I don't claim in my book that I cracked any of these cases. I think my suspect in the Paul Stein case, just because there was a suspect arrested and booked for the murder of Darlene Ferrin. I think that was the gun that was used. I don't think he did it. He's just holding that gun for a Hell's Angel. I don't claim I cracked the case. I don't claim even the Paul Stein case, but I have a suspect who has the scars on his neck and who is associated with the same networks. And it's not just that Hal Snook's friend Tony Poe was in the CIA. It's that he was in the CIA heavily involved in smuggling that heroin out of the Golden Triangle. And he made a lot of waves. But he was assured that none of that heroin was ending up on the streets of America. Well, Hal Snook's specialty as a cop was identifying which drug lab made which batch of drugs. And talking about accidentally misspelled words, in the Zodiac letters, none of those words are misspelled. They're correctly spelled words, but they're words that relate to chemical processes and actually very specifically to battlefield chemistry, which Hal Snook was an expert in. Right, like Cirrus is not curious, right. It's Cirrus oxalate. So if you take a tiny amount of Cirrus oxalate and add it to a batch of heroin that's being made at the lab, a tiny amount is all you need. And it's perfectly harmless to the junkie. It used to be given as air sickness medicine before Dramamine was invented. It's also used by spies as invisible ink. If you put a teeny tiny drop of that in a batch of heroin, and a little bit of heroin goes a long way. Then
let's Druzer respond, Prof.
Oh, okay.
Motive for these linguistic clues. Go.
You mean the linguistic clues that prove there's
Why
more than one
say
literary?
Cirrus?
The scientific.
We're obviously supposed to be curious.
Oh, well, he might be sending a message to somebody that this is who's writing these letters, so don't get too nosy. He could be doing that. But the thing about the Cirrus oxalate is, if Tony Poe spiked a shipment of heroin with Cirrus oxalate, when it hit the streets of America, Hal had already built up a network of narcotic, just flat feet all across California, teaching them basic little cop chemistry. If you catch a suspect with some powder in his pocket and you put a drop of this on there and you put a drop of that on there. If you put a drop of cheap ordinary hydrogen peroxide on anything containing Cirrus oxalate, it'll turn purple. If that happens, I want you to send me a sample of it. So then he could prove that Vang Pao's heroin was ending up on the streets of America. And how do you coordinate this activity? Through the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle, because Tony Poe was notorious for throwing a fit if he didn't get his fresh copy of the San Francisco Chronicle. And Paul Avery, he leaves the Chronicle, he goes to Southeast Asia, he tries to start an independent wire news service. He finally gives up in the spring of '69, comes back to the Chronicle as he's part-time, he's freelance. And this is when Robert Graysmith first gets the job at the Chronicle, is in the spring of '69. This is when the Pinecrest Diner first opens, is the spring of '69. While he's overseas, Tony Poe can't communicate with Hal Snook through the normal CIA channels. They're being monitored. So
it's easier to do it through the paper.
And
code.
and when you know your bosses are looking over your shoulder and reading the newspaper to see if you're doing it, you have to be extra careful. Here's a very simple way of doing it. If he has a reporter with access to a news wire that the Chronicle subscribes to, he can put messages or just send certain stories, blah, 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 over the wire service. These stories don't have to be published in the newspaper. They just have to have somebody inside the Chronicle with access to that teletype. Well, they had several people access to the teletype, so that was possible. It was possible for Tony Poe to send messages to Hal Snook. A simple message. I think I'm ready. What do I do now? Hal Snook, remember what the purpose of the letters was. Only one thing, to get those 2 cryptograms published in the paper. That's it. He didn't give a shit if they published his letters. He didn't give a shit about anything else.
You mean the 3-part cipher?
Well, yeah, the first 3-part cipher, the 408, the 340, and the paragraph about 2 cops pulled a goof. Those are the only 3 things he demanded be published in the paper. Well, maybe
not Cirrus.
Well, but that wasn't published in the paper. He didn't know that would be. It wasn't published in the paper. The Cirrus analate. Analate is a chemical term from battlefield chemistry. Blah 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 blah.
If it was an important clue that he wanted to communicate through the newspaper, why didn't he insist?
No. Well, no. Only the cryptograms, which, if there's any, maybe it's just a go code and a stop code. Okay, I'm ready on this end. Start shipping the spiked heroin, and I'm ready to receive it. And I've got all these cops across California that are on the lookout for it. Then, because here's the funny thing. The bus bomb letter and the dripping pen card and the 340, they come November 8th, 9th, 69. Tony Poe was yanked out of the field from Cambodia and stuck behind a desk in Bangkok, Thailand, around November 10th? I mean, the 2 things happened really close together. I got to
refocus us, Prof. So why do I think the Zodiac 1 killer theory? Why is Lake Berryessa? Lake Berryessa is the one that I will acquiesce to you is possible to be a copycat.
So if it is, here's the funny thing. There's a suspect.
It's possible, but
hold
it's
on.
unlikely. And I'm going to tell you why it's unlikely.
Okay, go ahead.
Just let you go, Prof. I'm going to tell you why it's unlikely. So why do I think that's the Zodiac, a 1 killer Zodiac? Because he writes the note on the car door.
Okay.
He takes credit for, I killed these 2 kids in the North Bay area in the letter, and he also makes the phone call. So that's a lot of work.
Well, no, we don't know. We don't know that the person who made the phone call is the same person who wrote that message on the car door, let alone we don't know if that's the killer. Because once again, just like Blue Rock Springs, all that information had been broadcast over police radio, and lots of people had police band radio. So it could have been a prank caller. But leaving all that aside, it doesn't have to be likely.
You can't call these people liars.
Who's a liar? Who's a liar? I didn't say anybody was
David
a liar.
Slade is a liar.
No, I didn't say David Slade. No, I didn't say they were liars.
They're misled by the prank call.
I said the calls.
And they're lying.
No. The calls didn't come from the killer.
The calls said they were a killer.
Well, so they got those calls all the time.
Yeah, but here's the difference.
This was 40 minutes after someone was killed. And
it's Zodiac's MO.
It's
Zodiac's MO, Prof. He calls after Blue Rock Springs, then he calls again after Lake Berryessa. It's his thing.
But he doesn't do it all the time. And number 2, all the information in those phone calls had been broadcast over police dispatch radio frequencies. So it could have been a prank caller. You haven't ruled out a copycat.
You're saying
that information would not have come over a police radio.
Yes, it's in the reports that they radio for an ambulance and other police units to come down to the beach because 2 kids have been stabbed. All that information had been broadcast over police dispatch radios, which the San Francisco Chronicle and the Oakland Tribune and the Vallejo News Chronicle all had. Not to mention kids like Tom Bomber had these radios. So the phone call, maybe it came from the killer. It's kind of funny. How come he doesn't identify himself? Why doesn't he say to the victims? Why doesn't he say
I'm about to tell you.
This is the Zodiac speaking. Why doesn't he say that? Because
he hadn't thought of it yet.
Because he had thought of it. The second letter, August the 2nd, more material letter. This is the Zodiac speaking. But that was the one thing that had not been printed in the newspapers yet, that he called himself Zodiac. They had printed facsimiles of the letters, so he had 8 weeks to copy the handwriting, which isn't a very good match. He had 8 weeks to sew that little crosshair symbol on his little costume. It could be...
No.
Listen, here's what's important. Nothing actually rules out a copycat. That doesn't automatically prove it was a copycat. But the funny thing is, there's a suspect living in the area who matches the MO of this killing and matches the physical description of the killer.
Sometimes you move too fast.
Well, I know, because...
You say something, that's why we're interrupting.
Right.
Neither of us are trying to be rude. It's just
No, it's just...
we've read this for years.
sympathize. I sympathize with you guys.
Okay.
I
so
sympathize.
what information came through the Blue Rock Springs call? Brown car, kids, location.
Well, let's read the transcript.
And he said Luger.
Let's read the transcript, because it's in the...
So you're saying all of that information was broadcast over the police radio, that they had a brown car, that there was two kids shot, that it was 9mm Luger ammo?
Positions of the bodies? Come on, Prof.
No. If you read the reports and you read the transcript of the phone call and the time when officers said they radioed in asking for an ambulance, blah, 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 then a dispatch goes out. When he says, if you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, well, Vallejo Police Headquarters is, 2.5 miles south of Blue Rock Springs Park? What is exactly 1 mile west of Blue Rock Springs Park? Do you know? Did you read my book?
I don't remember what you said in there, sorry.
The fire department station, one mile west, because in the phone call he says, if you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you'll find the kids in a brown car. He's talking in the third person. Now, there's another version of the phone call where he talks in the first person. I shot them. I used a 9mm. You're talking about 2 separate phone calls. That one, who knows, maybe it was from the killer. But the one about if you drive 1 mile east, well, Vallejo Police Headquarters is 2.5 miles south of the crime scene, but 1 mile west of the crime scene is the fire station and EMT station where the fire truck and ambulance were dispatched from.
And I also kid those kids last year.
Yeah, here's the thing, Prof.
Maybe he said that. Maybe
Nancy
he said
Slover's
that.
on record. What do you mean maybe, though?
Well,
Nancy
hold on.
Record.
Remember, she gets at least 2 phone calls at the same time. She gets the phone call from the payphone, and she also gets the phone call from Debbie's... Is it Debbie? The three kids who found the victims and called the cops. She gets that phone call from the second phone call from her brother-in-law. It's in the reports. Her brother-in-law didn't have a phone, so they had to drive to his house. He's a rookie cop. They can't afford a phone. They drive to his house. He drives to a gas station payphone to call the police department because Debbie tells him, we called the cops and it didn't sound like she believed us. So we're concerned she didn't believe us, and they don't want to go to the cop shop because they're stinking a pot. So they go to her brother-in-law's house, and he goes and he makes his phone call to Nancy Slover at about 12:40, and his phone call would have been in the third person. I think Nancy actually got 2 phone calls within seconds of each other because she didn't write anything down until July the 8th. So I think she got 2 phone calls, and she got him confused. One came from Debbie's brother-in-law. Is it Debbie? It's the 3.
Yeah.
Jerry.
You actually did a pretty good job of explaining it in the book. I'll give you that, although I don't necessarily agree.
I also killed those kids last year. How could that be misinterpreted?
Why would he take credit for Lake Herman Road?
Unless what he because she said she barely heard it. He was starting to hang up the phone. Unless he actually said he killed those kids last year. Now, there's another completely different version of the phone call that is in the first person, but it's very short.
Speculation, Prof.
Hold on.
We gotta.
You have to admit that it's possible. You have to admit there's no actual evidence, but if you're going to convict somebody of murder, you got to have more than that. My point is, once you realize that it's a completely different story than what you've heard, once you realize that and then the icing on the cake is there's just no doubt that Hal Snook wrote those first letters. Now, I think he also wrote the Paul Stein letter, but other experts think he did not, that he only wrote those first, technically it's 4 letters, and then he was done. Maybe he got mad. Maybe he felt he was being used. Maybe he didn't want to do this anymore. and you see somebody else with a totally different personality. People who have no access to police reports, blah, 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 blah. They take over writing the letters, and the handwriting is also
No,
different.
the personality is consistent through the letters, in my opinion, as you know, Druzer.
Personality is consistent. The
Comic books,
handwriting
movies.
is
He
consistent
goes from being
according to
deadly
people who
serious.
have seen the actual documents, not just over the internet low res images. They
Well, I
can
got
see
high-res
how
ones.
fast they're written. They can see where the pen's starting and stopping.
Pen strokes.
And as I point out, no, I haven't done that very publicly yet. What you
No,
see
you're
in
right
the
about
book,
the tone, though. The tone changes, but
No.
it's not.
You can
concrete.
see that
People
exact
change
thing
their
that
tone from letter to letter.
well, but an excuse for a lack of consistency is not the same thing as consistency. The big thing is those first couple of letters, he seems to have direct knowledge of the crimes. In the following letters, after Paul Stein, he doesn't even pretend to have, or after the two cops pulled a goof, he doesn't even pretend to know anything about any murders because the person writing those letters doesn't have access. But you can see in the
But the murders are over after that point, Prof. So what do you mean?
No, they're not. They're not. Well,
what do you mean?
Then okay, then why bother writing letters at all? See, here's the thing.
Because you
Why is he
started
writing
with
letters?
saying that he's
No.
his own category of domestic terrorist. The Zodiac is the first domestic serial terrorist. He created this mass hysteria, much like Jack the Ripper created in Victoria, London, in the turn of the century. And you covered that vigilante journalism in your book, Prof.
Exactly. It's a publicity stunt.
Exactly.
So
and it started with the four
that.
canonical murders.
Well, or it's somebody just keeping the publicity stunt alive for the benefit of the Chronicle
can I
and for
offer-
Mobility.
Go ahead, Druzer.
Yeah,
I'd like to offer
absolutely.
something. This is a consistency. Maybe it works with your theory, maybe it doesn't. There's the same paper stock used in all of the letters from Woolworths. There's a Fifth Avenue watermark on, well, several of them anyway.
That's pretty good, Prof.
So multiple letters would have to be sharing the same paper or saying, go to Woolworths, buy this. Make sure you buy a blue felt tip pen, which is also consistent.
Except on the car door at Lake Berryessa, where he used a black pen. Why did he do that?
Because he
Same
needed
reason
something.
he used a black pen on the ciphers, I suppose.
Yep.
He just had more than one.
No, he used blue pens all the way through. And Hal Snook had experience knowing that blue ink will show up black on repro film. And
Prof,
Is that what I'm looking at? Like when I've seen the in the evidence room when Tom Voight went in there and he's looking at the ciphers and it's clearly black ink. Is that just time?
right, has he published pictures of this, or is he just telling us this?
No, there's
Well, I
video.
would love to see those because the ciphers. See, here's another
Oh,
thing.
you absolutely should go on to his Tapatop.
Prof, we got a question for you.
Sure, absolutely.
Cat Daddy Steve, please ask Horan how he knows Herman Road turnout was a known body dump. I can't find a single news report of
That's
anyone
what I was-
other than the two kids being killed at the turnout.
You have to. That's one. I interviewed a lot of cops in Vallejo who worked at that time, and one of the cops told me they found at least a dozen dead people out there in that period of time. If you go out there and
Interesting.
and you can see it on the documentary, I think there's no way that's a lover's lane. There's no. It's hard not to get rear-ended parked on that road. Now there was a lover's lane less than. It was a couple hundred yards back towards town to the north. There was a perfect lover's lane, but not there. And see, they didn't show this in the documentary. Probably shouldn't be telling you this. They put a drone up. There's this pink house that supposedly was a clubhouse for the Hells Angels, right? And they stored drugs there, right? Pierre Bidou said it was being busted that night or whatever. But nobody can really figure out where it is. I always thought it was the caretaker's house. There's a nice park that's half mile closer to town. There's a nice little picnic area, and there's a caretaker's house. I thought that was the house, but they put a drone up when we were out there. There's a little house that's just over the gate from that turnout, and it's about you can't see it for all the growth, but it's only like 50 yards, 75 yards. So if that's the party Pierre Bidou was talking about, but it's hard to say. But if you go out there, there's no way anybody in their right mind would park there after dark. But what are, there's that hour and a half that's missing from their lives. They leave their friend's house, and the first witnesses don't see them on Lake Herman Road till almost an hour, about an hour and a half later. Where were they? They were with somebody who never came forward and said who they were with. I think it's possible that when they left their friend's house, Sharon's house or whatever, Sharon's friend's house, I think there might have been somebody in the back seat with a gun and made them drive someplace and then made them drive out there to Lake Herman Road, because that might explain why they didn't show up at the Christmas concert. There could easily have been somebody in the backseat with a gun.
The Christmas concert is weird because it was a week earlier, and the newspapers didn't catch on to that. It's been in, I don't know how many times I've read details about it. I guess that it would explain why Betty and David were actually seen at the Christmas party. That's because it was the week before.
Right, that could be.
Whether David actually said that they were going to a Christmas party or whether the mother was mistaken.
If they were, I don't know if David would do this to Betty. David was a real hero type. And I talked to some guys who were like scouts, and he was their leader when, their Eagle Scout. He real hero type. And I don't see him sitting there on his hands while Betty Lou gets out of the car and gets shot. I think there's something different going on there. I thought that her own dad might have been a possible suspect for this shooting, because it seems like somebody said, "Get out of the car, Betty Lou," and got her out of the car first. And then David gets shot later. But I don't know, because they were...
slow down, Prof. Doesn't the evidence show that David shot first, Druzer, and in fact Betty turns and attempts to run? How can we know?
I think David was shot first, but we can't prove that.
Yes,
All we
can
say is that there was a grain of gunshot residue on Betty. Therefore, she was shot within 5 feet.
Well, but if you look at the first shot might have been, because if you look at where the shell casings fell, and David was shot behind the left ear, so you have a left-handed shooter. If you don't have a left-handed shooter, he's standing to David's left and putting the gun up to the back to his left ear. Okay, so he shoots David, then he steps over David's corpse, walks back to the passenger door, then he turns around and starts shooting Betty Lou. No,
yeah, because she
Betty
ran.
Lou gets
shoots David.
Also, remember,
and shoots Betty
you have to.
She runs.
No, he turns around, steps over David's corpse, walks back to where the front door. No,
he doesn't step. They're all in the same place.
No, they're not. No, they're not.
Grouping.
No, they're not. The shot that killed David is to David's left. Well, the shell casing jumps to the right, but all of the rest of the rest of them are in a little tiny pile. If you go back and look at the diagram, and I made a video about this. Now, anything is possible, but Betty Lou gets out of the car on the passenger side, then David gets out of the passenger side, and he's standing over here. Where's Betty Lou? Is she standing to David's right or David's left?
I think she would be just a little behind the rear passenger door. I would think she got out of the car. This guy's got a gun.
Then the shooter had to turn around. The shooter had to turn around and walk back to the passenger door, turn around, and then start shooting at her.
The shooter was at the passenger door the whole time.
No. Well, then how did he put the gun to the left behind David's left ear if David is all the way back to the rear wheel? How does he stand in the front passenger door?
I didn't say David was in the rear wheel. I think David's getting out of the passenger seat.
No, he was shot. Remember, here's the station wagon. Here's the rear wheel, and here's David's feet. They're right where the rear wheel is. And he was shot. He was facing the car, and the shot came behind his left ear. So the gun was to the left of David, towards the back bumper of the Rambler, towards the area where Betty Lou was shot. It's very complicated to do it that way. The simplest thing is she gets out of the car first. The killer turns around, guns are down. At some point, he fires a shot down through the roof of the car to scare David into staying in the car. He warns David to stay in the car because he gets out of the passenger side of the second car that witnesses saw there. He fires one shot over the top of the second car. That shot goes in the back glass. You can tell this from where the shell casings were found. They're diagrammed very precisely. Then he walks around to the front of the second car. He fires another shot that just barely grazes the roof of the Rambler. It misses the windshield, goes over the top of the Rambler. Then he comes around. He opens the passenger door, apparently. At some point, he fires a shot down through the roof of the Rambler, which I think is a shot to scare David into staying in the car while he deals with Betty Lou. She takes off running. The first shot is within 5 feet. She keeps running. She finally hits the ground. You can tell from the angle of the shots. Then David gets out of the car. He marches him back to the back of the car, makes him put his hand on the roof of the car, and shoots him in the back of the left ear. Because otherwise, you've got them both getting out of the passenger side. He's trying to control 2 victims, one of which is a wrestler who could kick his ass and would be willing to kick his ass. He has to control all of this. How does he control David?
He's a 17-year-old kid, and you don't know who the killer is. He's a 17-year-old champion wrestler and Eagle Scout who's preparing to join the military. He's just standing there while the shooter pumps 5 shots into Betty Lou. He just stands there and doesn't do anything.
I don't mind.
He just stands there and doesn't do anything.
As I say, I'm not positive who got shot first, but it
well,
seems more
if you look at the shell
logical
casings, there's a very complicated scenario where David gets shot first. There's a super simple scenario where Betty Lou gets shot first. The most important thing is the shooter gets out of the passenger side of the second car, not the driver's side. And that's the known MO of what's his name? Rusty.
Let Druzer.
I'm glad you brought that up because that I think is maybe the one piece of common ground that we might have is other than a car catching the shell and flinging it, more than a dozen feet. It does seem like the killer got out of the passenger side of the vehicle, which obviously implies that there is more than one shooter. The only theory that I have that keeps it a one-person attack, and I would not do this if I was looking at this case in isolation, but I'm looking at it with the other ones, which seem like there's one guy. With that in mind, he has a gun which potentially has a flashlight on it.
No, that's ridiculous. Sorry, that's absolutely ridiculous. It didn't have a flashlight on. But the tail lights,
just let him go, Prof. Just let him
the tail lights, the tail lights of the Rambler would have given him plenty of light to see.
Okay, fair point.
If he has his gun in the back seat, then he maybe has to get out of the car and go around to retrieve it. And once he does,
while the victims are driving away.
Well, exactly.
He boxed him in. Why driving away though?
The victims who are down.
No, they weren't boxed in. They weren't boxed in.
They weren't boxed in.
No,
but they are in a reclined position in their seating.
Well, maybe.
And now they realize there's a psycho out there with a gun, so they try to drive away. He starts the car, and that's why the warning shots to get them out.
Well, the warning shots wouldn't get them out. The warning shots would keep them in. You don't get out of a car because somebody's shooting at you. You stay in the car because somebody's shooting.
They're telling you to get out of the car for whatever reason.
So I think it's far simpler. The killer got out of the passenger side of the car with his gun in his hand, fired shots to keep David in the car because he wanted to talk to Betty Lou. See, David's parents, not so fishy. Betty Lou's father had recently gotten out of the Army. He was an officer, chemical weapons, and then when he went to work for Pacific Gas and Electric, that's what he was. He was the liaison with the military whenever the military needed to pipe napalm or whatever to an aircraft carrier or whatever. That's what, or just to be that guy in case of a national emergency, because there is a war going on in Vietnam. He's that guy for PG&E who can liaise with the military's needs on pipelines. But before that, he'd been at a chemical weapons facility at Colorado Springs. So this could be a warning to Colonel Jensen. So you send it fairly, but it could be the drugs. It could be.
Let me refocus, Prof. Because you did do an excellent job on Lake Herman Road in the book and in the documentary. But give Druzer the scenario that you outlined in the book, and also I want to get you guys. Do you give any credence to the William Crowe car chase story before the events of Lake Herman Road? And what about you, Druzer?
Could be.
Okay. I just don't think it was the shooter. That's all. It's just somebody else. And he, he reads about the case the next day and he gets all excited and he's trying to help. But like Druzer said, I'm not trying to say I've cracked every case and nailed it shut. What I'm saying is The actual police reports, the actual evidence tell a totally different story, and that story starts to fit in, including the media hype, including.
So you gave your own scenario of Lake Herman Road in the book, Prof. And since Druzer hasn't read it, he's not going to know. So give him what you get, or just summarize what you presented in the book.
Well, basically, apparently, David and Betty Lou were. We all grew up in a world where there were drugs at our school, but they didn't start out that way. This drug thing really exploded in the late 60s, and Vallejo is right on the main pipeline coming down from Mendocino County, where they're smuggling, where they're growing, where they're cooking. And the Hells Angels has taken this stuff over really fast. So David and Betty Lou, their schools are just hitting the teeth with this. There's people getting shot. There's a 14-year-old kid running around killing people over this. Mm-hmm. So... and you have the Rocky Dixon and all those other guys. You have this sudden crime wave in Vallejo. So they are apparently trying to do something to stand up to it. Now, Vallejo did not have a auxiliary police force for teenagers to join. But as an Eagle Scout, I think David was, and he said so, he got in that altercation probably with Rusty. It matches the description at the Pancake House, where he says, I'm going to put a stop to you guys dealing drugs at my school, if necessary, go to the cops. Well, Pierre Bidou, who later becomes police chief at Benicia, he says there was a drug bust going on that night, and that maybe it doesn't even really matter. If these guys just jump to the conclusion that David and Betty Lou were narking, they'd already gunned down some guys in cold blood that they said that they thought were narking on them. So they would have done it. This matches their MO, and this explains why Les Lundblad, because after a week, he gets 2 tips that it might involve drugs after all, because he was told that David and Betty Lou didn't do drugs. So he said, well, it must not have been that. But if this gang thought they were snitching, and they think they see a connection between David and Betty Lou being on Lake Herman Road and their stash getting busted, they might have just gone out there to just do it anyway. That killing might have been something of, who snitched on us, go find Faraday, and if you find him, kill him kind of a thing. That one could have been. But David and Betty Lou sat there for a long time. So that's a busy highway. That was a busy highway at that time of night. So I just don't see this as a random, and then you find out Colonel Jensen worked with chemical weapons, and Leo Salinan worked on nuclear submarines, and Arthur Farron worked on nuclear submarines, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
But in the book, you zeroed in on Hell's Angels and the drug bust connection, and you named your own suspect. What do you think, Druzer?
Was Faraday an informer? Is that what you think?
Essentially,
well, he had publicly threatened this kid. I'm going to do something.
He had a dispute at school.
I know why I'm asking if that's what you think. You think he was a snitch, or you're not 100% convinced?
He threatened the other kid that he was going to do something.
Well, I think the thing that matters is this drug dealing gang of thugs thought he was. And I think they thought very seriously about killing him. Whether they did or not, I'm sure they talked about it. I'm sure this guy talked about it. He starts killing people. And then
half an hour after the drug bust, they went looking for him in his mother's car. They thought, hey, maybe he's out tonight. Hey, maybe he's down here, and they get lucky.
Well, the drug bust was supposedly happening. No. The drug bust was supposedly happening right down the road. So if they're driving down the road and they recognize Faraday's car, there's that son of a bitch right there, and they get out and do him. It doesn't have to be done on that particular night. It could have been done any night. But if there was a drug bust going on, and it fits this guy's MO, now, is that enough that I could go into court and convict the guy? Probably not. I admit that. What I'm saying is, at the time of these murders, they had really good suspects. But see, that guy can't be the same guy who did Lake Berryessa. He can't be, right? So this becomes really good cover, creating the character of the Zodiac, including using several different handwritings, is really good cover if they pull it off. And apparently, to a certain extent, they did pull it off, although not all the cops were fooled. But then if you've got somebody like Pelicetti who can call federal agents and they can say, well, back off, this is our case, that's all that has to be done.
Okay.
But you're
not saying that Betty Lou and David were there to meet cops because they'd already spoken to them and they
Well,
were working with them.
maybe we just don't know. We're never going to know because somebody knows where they were before they showed up at Blue Rock or Lake Herman Road, and that person never said anything. I mean, somebody knows where they were because they didn't go parking on a lover's lane because they would still be there. Why would you leave a lover's lane and go to that spot on Lake Herman Road? It's ludicrous.
You outlined a specific scenario in the book, Prof, and you have your own suspect with Rex. Is that correct?
Well, there's this John Doe Ott, and the most likely suspect for that is a guy who was recently convicted, first-degree murder, racketeering, became a senior Hell's Angel, Russell Taylor Ott, Rusty Ott. Now, I can't prove that that's him, and please don't tell him I accused him. But there's another guy, the Ricky Burton kid, who was supposedly stalking Betty Lou. I have seen pictures of him. I don't think I'm authorized to publish them. He looks almost like Rusty Ott's brother. They could pass as twins. I think he might have been in the car he found them when they were at Betty Lou's friend's house before they even left. He could have gotten into the back of that car and been in the back seat with a gun waiting on him. That's possible too. It could have just been that because
his family lied kind of thing.
Yeah, he was a dangerous juvenile delinquent too. Now, he recently passed away, but he looked just like he was the spitting image of Rusty Ott. That's for sure. Now, you've probably heard of David Walliott, and these guys would trade IDs and stuff. Now, David Walliott was the guy with acromegaly, like Elephant Man syndrome. So he had an unusually large head. And I think Mike Mageau described the shooter at BRS as having a large face, so there's some possibility. But he was a big guy. His friends called him Boris, like Boris Karloff, and he's a known
6'7"
killer.
or something.
Well, no, that was the guy Warren.
Or was that Porter?
Warren. That was Donald Warren Porter. He's like 6'9", badass, dangerous, but 6'9". So he could have been the Blue Rock Springs shooter.
You pushed the Hell's Angels theory pretty heavily in the book, Prof. Let's get to some comments, gentlemen. So Richard Grinnell pushing back earlier. He could prove the same person wrote the letters from 69 to 87. That's Rich's position, Prof.
And I can prove that they didn't. So there we go. Well, Richard and I are going to do another episode sometime.
Yeah.
Hi, Richard.
Yeah. We need you both. We need you both.
I think you need the actual physical documents.
Well, let me show you. Let me show you what. I didn't even think to bring this up. I haven't published any of this yet, but I can show you things in the handwriting that any layperson can see that shows that it's more than one hand, and it's at least three hands, and no person has three hands. I can show, but now Richard has done really interesting work on the letters. For example, the Exorcist letter. I saw and think The Exorcist is the best satirical comedy. That looks more like Hal Snook's natural handwriting, and Hal Snook was known for writing those kinds of letters to the editors of newspapers, not just about Zodiac. He wrote those kind of cold sense of humor kind of letters. So that letter might not even have any. He might not have even been thinking Zodiac when he wrote that letter. He wrote letters like that to the editors of newspapers. So that could be.
I have a Snook question if you're up for it.
Sure.
Fire away.
So
then we're doing Blue Rock Springs.
Okay. Sure. I'm simplifying your theory greatly, but Snook writes the first few letters, and he uses crimes in these two towns near Vallejo. So he's created Zodiac,
right?
At that point,
right?
And then, is it a coincidence that a copycat Zodiac crime happens in his jurisdiction?
Not only that, but the prime suspect that the cops have is the park ranger Dennis Land. But I think he's just the accomplice, maybe operating the camera. I think it was Leonard Lake. That fits Leonard Lake's motive so perfectly, and he was living in the area at the time, and he matches the description
of the madman.
And this
was not Leonard Lake.
Oh, have you well, then you know his MO. He gets the victim under his control, very calm. He's very calm. Let me just put the handcuffs on you. Nothing bad's going to happen to you. Once he gets the victim under his control, he starts just upping the tension and making these, he's very calm. He's telling them they're going to die. And then after about 10, 15 minutes, he finishes them off. That's what happens at Lake Berryessa. And that
He
was
doesn't really tell them they're going to die, though.
Well,
But
but
it
what
is
I
just-
mean is he toys with the victim for that
Yeah.
exact same period of
I
time.
got you.
He also perfectly matches the description of the killer, and most people didn't realize Leonard was living in the area by that time. Now that doesn't mean he did it.
Hold on, Prof. Which killer are you talking about? Are you talking about
Leonard
the
Lake.
lurker sketch?
Like-
I know, right? But which?
Oh no! The
killer?
description, when they said that they could see past the slit in the costume. and
Okay, the masked killer.
He had dark wavy hair, because the park ranger Dennis Land, he had straight hair, but Leonard Lake is about 5'10", 5'11". He's about 185 pounds at this time. He has that hair, and we know he filmed murders. That
So
might
you
explain
have him
why did that
copycatting Zodiac's cross logo on the bib.
for his costume for this movie, this snuff film he's making, which he trades. He trades snuff films and hardcore porno films for weapons, for supplies, for his doomsday prepping. So I'm not saying that proves absolutely it was him. What I'm saying is he actually fits because Dennis Land, I mean, you can see why he's the prime suspect, which I don't think I've even.
You couldn't have made the phone call.
Correct.
He didn't have
Prof
to.
has a
And
different.
Cecilia
He doesn't
saw-
have to
saw
make the
the
phone
killer.
call. He doesn't
Yes.
have to
Cecilia
make.
saw the killer without his mask on. And,
Cecilia
and
saw
was alive
before the hood was
to
on.
see him. Didn't
So
recognize him.
From far
maybe
away.
maybe he's actually the accomplice, because the killer had to park on that levee road, which could only be accessed by locked gates at that time. He did not park. The other witnesses, her name was Jensen. They're super distantly related but I don't think they knew.
You don't think
they
he
even knew
parked
that.
directly behind Hartnell?
Not according to the witnesses, because they said they saw. Did you see the
Yeah,
documentary?
there's a lot coming out about
I
that
don't-
being in question.
I don't
Now,
believe
so,
this-
but
this
anyway,
stalker was
the
the
point
killer.
is, there are no footprints that go anywhere near where that other car had been previously parked, and that car could have been parked there days before because it
Are
hadn't
you
rained.
talking about at the other site?
No, at Lake the Lake Berryessa. Lake
They had the
Berryessa.
footprints
Uh-uh.
from the perpetrator's car to the
Not from the perpetrator's car.
suspect's car.
No, there are no footprints. Read the report again. There are no footprints anywhere near where that other car had parked behind Brian's car. I don't think it was there the same day anyway. But there are no footprints that go over there. They only go from the crime scene up over the levee road, where later on the park ranger will park and find David. They go across that road. They go up the hill to the highway, over the turnstile, the foot stile, over the fence, over to Brian's car where the message was written. Then they go back to the foot stile and go all the way back down to the crime scene. Not one footprint anywhere near the area of that other car.
Okay.
So now here's the thing. So where did
Finish
the
up,
killer
bro.
park? Where'd the killer park? Well, he must have parked, according to the footprints, the only other place you could park was on top of that levee road, which in those days could only be accessed by park rangers and deputies like Dennis Land.
We got witnesses, Prof. Hold on. We have the two dentist and his son, and they saw a shabbily dressed man who looked out of place walking back up the hill.
Did they
after
see
the
him?
crime was intrusive.
Did they see him kill anybody?
Well, come
that
on,
doesn't
Prof.
make him the
what do you
killer.
want me to do?
That doesn't
But
make
he's
him the
walking
killer.
out of the crime scene. That's
I'm-
why
I'm
everybody
not-
says.
It's a
I'm not
public
convinced
park.
either.
It's
Okay,
a
well,
public
if
state
Druzer's
park.
indifferent, I think that was the killer.
Well,
but
you guys
Prof,
haven't seen the stuff, the radio logs where actually Dennis Land has zero alibi for the crime, and he's out of radio contact precisely from the moment that the kids come across the Pope Creek Bridge on their way to the lake to the moment that the first radio dispatch goes out that there's been a report of an attack. He's out of radio contact that whole entire time. And he said,
I mean, I've heard you say it before, but this is why people think, some people think that the lurker is the Zodiac, Prof, because he's so close.
he
he's
could be
on
an accomplice.
Peninsula over, right? For sure,
Could
sure.
be
But
an
I'm just saying,
accomplice. And I
right
think
location, generally at the right time.
probably an accomplice. And I think Dennis Land was essentially an accomplice. But Dennis Land turns out to be a solid gold suspect for the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings. So
I mean, what you have for him, like, since we're on this, you covered it in the book, right? Him having this forensic training, but actually picking up the blanket and
destroying
moving
the crime scene,
right? But here's the problem,
stomping
Prof.
all over it.
But this is how I read into that. You have the worst crime in Lake Berryessa history, 2 victims bleeding to death, 1 that goes to the hospital and dies. It was in a moment of extreme panic, Prof. I just read it as he grabbed it and
he had
moved
8
it
years experience. He had 8 years experience in a big
that's
city.
Where you have, that's where you have a good rebuttal for me. That's where you have a good. So your point is good on that one.
He had 8 years experience as a military. He had a criminal justice degree. Hal Snook was one of his teachers. Hal Snook taught him how not to fuck up a crime. Pardon my language. How not to mess up a crime scene. Then he gets 8 years. Well, he had previous experience as a park ranger. That's a law enforcement job. You're a cop. Then he has 8 years experience as a military policeman in a big city of Stuttgart. So there's no way he panics.
So,
and
let me push back. So you give no credence to the worst crime in Lake Berryessa history that is, possibly at this point. I mean, I guess maybe no one's directly connecting it to the Zodiac yet because he hasn't, taken credit for it in the exact moment. But I don't know. I mean, you're worried about the victims. You're worried about trying to save the victims.
They had other.
What was on the blanket, right? Their personal effects in a blanket. So it's not like you have the murder weapon,
Hold on. First of all, nobody's dead yet. They're both still alive.
But they sustained near fatal injuries.
Well, but have you ever stabbed anybody? It's not that obvious.
Yeah, all the time, Prof.
It's not. If they're wearing clothes and you stab them, they might not have looked like they were hurt all that badly. So I don't buy into this whole idea. It was not the worst crime committed at Lake Berryessa.
Covered in blood.
There were
massive amount of blood
in the genitals.
Yeah, but you can get that much blood from a scalp wound. He's not going to panic because these 2 kids have been stabbed. They're not even dead. He didn't panic. But
okay.
That's not the worst crime. That's not the worst crime that was committed out there. They did have 2. Were they drug dealers? Shot to pieces out there? There's this myth that these crimes happened in a vacuum. They didn't happen in a vacuum. But I'm just saying.
I don't think Ross knows he's muted.
Oh.
Yeah, you're muted, Ross.
Sorry, guys. So the drug dealers are bad guys, Prof. No one cares when that happens to drug dealers that got blasted to 1,000 pieces. When it's 2 college kids that quite literally, like Druzer said, they had not planned to be there. They show up there randomly and they get attacked randomly. It has a different level of gravity to some person that already does crime. That's a career criminal. You know what I'm saying? Like, so there's a lot more concern for.
Yeah, but that's no excuse for him destroying a crime scene. There's just he removed the evidence and took it with him away from the crime scene and handed it over to police later.
Yeah, no, you got me on that. That's the only problem with Lake Berryessa. You got me on that. All right, and we got some super chats. Restless Dreams isn't feeling your theory, Prof. So Land did the killing, Snook did the car door, and a random guy called the police and claimed it. You can't be serious. He doesn't like it.
No, I didn't say any of those things. I said that at the time, first of all, when you read the reports, Morph's the one who got the last pages about Land. They're not in that original set that Rodelli got. When you read those reports, it's not only that Dennis Land looks like he might be a good suspect, he was treated like the prime suspect. But a couple weeks later, Paul Stein gets shot, and obviously Dennis Land's got a solid gold alibi for that, so he can't be quote-unquote Zodiac, so there's not much more they can do. I didn't say how Snook wrote the message on the car door. The killer wrote the message on the car door, but the killer had 8 weeks to practice his Zodiac handwriting that had been published in photo facsimile form in the newspapers to see if somebody recognized the handwriting. And it's not that much of a similarity in the handwriting.
Right.
And somebody listen now, once you admit that there might be more than one person involved, maybe one of the co-conspirators did call the police. That may be part of the plan. He doesn't do it every time, and he forgets to say, this is the Zodiac speaking, and he forgets to tell the victims, I'm the Zodiac, because that had not yet been published in the papers. What I'm saying is there is no evidence that rules out the possibility of a copy. Berryessa. There is no evidence of any kind that actually rules out the possibility of a copycat. Sorry.
I agree with that, but I'm steadfast on my belief. He doesn't tell, in my full circle theory, Druzer, he doesn't tell the victims that he's the Zodiac because you're not going to panic Brian Hartnell, who is 6'7", when he's thinking about grabbing the gun for you. After the events of Gaviota Beach, 1963, Professor, when the Zodiac lost control of Robert Domingos and Linwood Edwards, got punched in his face. He leaves blood drops 75 feet up above the crime when he flees the scene because he lost control the last time he tried to tie up a male-female couple and perform the same ritual as the Lake Berryessa. He failed once in 63. He comes back with the I'm a escaped prisoner from Montana, Fern Lodge, whatever, you know what I mean? I'm trying to steal your car and get to Mexico. He creates a cover story because last time he tried that, it didn't work.
Right. That's possible. But my point is, if he had told Officer Slate, this is the Zodiac speaking, that might have proven something. But nothing he did at Lake Berryessa actually proves he's the same person writing the letters. Nothing. Why didn't he take a souvenir? Why didn't he take a piece of Cecilia's bloody shirt? He doesn't do anything that actually proves he's the same person writing the letters. Maybe he is the same person.
Why does he need to, though? It's the third canonical.
Well, then why does he need to do it in the Paul Stein murder case? If he doesn't need to do it in the, all I'm saying is,
well, because it's the last one. Hold on, I got you, Prof. Because that's the
Okay.
last one. He almost gets seen. He's not going to do it again, and he wants to make the massive, whatever you would call it, Druzer, event of writing the Belli letter and sending off the pieces of the shirt. You know, it's the final, you know, coup de grace.
So this has been pretty good. Way off? But again, there's so much stuff that you guys haven't, but I'm telling you, you got to read this book, then realize it's not that there's one thing I can point to. It's that in every single one of these cases, the myth doesn't live up to the evidence. And then you begin to realize we're looking at more than one suspect. They're not random kill. Well, but you don't see that right away. It's not until you find out who Hal Snook is that you begin to see, oh, there's a bigger thing going on here. Then you begin to see, you see the script being played out over and over again, going all the way back to the Charles Lindbergh baby kidnapping.
I think this is going to have to be continued because you have not in any way linked
Snook.
Sorry, these victims were all going to separate places.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't yet heard a theory about how any of these killers found these specific people.
Well, Darlene went to Blue Rock Springs at exactly midnight. That's the witching hour. That's when you meet people. And in this code, within the code, it says, I went to Blue Rock Springs Park to meet hippie victim's sister. And there might have been a third person in the car because from the ballistics evidence, it looks like Mike was sitting in the back seat the whole time. But be that as it may.
I don't want to hear that one again.
Be that as it may. That as it may, Darlene acted like she went to the park to meet somebody. She was supposed to go buy some drugs for a 4th of July party. That's what her brother Leo said. So it looks like she went there to meet somebody, and it looks like that person showed up.
But according to Mike, it was his idea to go to Blue Rock Springs.
Well, he changes his story a lot, so we have to decide what we want to believe. And he's a criminal.
Well, he was 19. But I don't
had a
see
record,
any reason why.
And when he's a criminal, he's been a criminal ever since.
Well, okay. Prof,
I don't see any reason why he would have been lying to the police, especially if he thought his life was in danger.
Exactly why he would lie to the police, because his life is in danger. If he squeals, they're going to try again.
About buying weed, though? I mean, come on.
The police are there to protect
him. If he knows who the shooter is. You mean...
Prof, what about...
protect him. Right?
Right.
Wouldn't that be his assumption?
Well, if Hoffman's the cop who did the shooting, then why would Hoffman protect?
Then it goes the other way. If Majot was worried that the police were involved, then why does he start? Why does he say, I thought it was a cop? We thought it was a cop approaching. And then why does he do interviews afterwards?
Well, he changes his story to match what's published in the newspapers.
Prof, what about morph suspect Mac for Blue Rock Springs? He lives close by, and how about he can walk to the phone and make the phone call? Could you have morph suspect fitting into your theory as the Blue Rock Springs shooter, or
I have
Arthur
no
Lee
idea.
Allen?
I have no idea who that guy is. And the thing about Arthur Lee Allen is,
no problem.
I don't think Arthur Lee Allen was randomly framed. I think part of the whole plan was to frame Arthur Lee Allen.
See, that I could see. quick question for you boys. My boy Crip Rick, can I ask a question? Why do you think Zodiac was apparently only seen wearing the hood that we all know once, Lake Berryessa? Well, you kind of covered that a little bit, Prof. What about you, Druzer?
I think he had lots of reasons to wear it at Lake Berryessa. He'd left a victim alive at the previous crime. He had to walk a huge distance from his car down to the site and back again. He had probably planned to write on the car door afterwards. If a motorist came by and saw him, he probably couldn't catch up to that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't
Yeah.
he?
And I also think he was living out a fantasy, trying to.
Agreed.
Why didn't he wear it when he was staring at the three girls on the beach? Why did he let them see his
Well,
face?
we don't know that's the same
Not the
guy,
same
Prof.
guy.
Like you said,
Well,
what's that to accomplish?
There's that,
My
but once
thought.
again, if it's the guy walking on the beach who's shabbily dressed as a suspect, then I think the guy right next to the beach where the victim
Not on the beach. Not on the beach. He's walking back to his car, Prof. The guy shot.
No, but what I mean, right? But what I mean
I
is,
see what
if
you're
he's
saying.
a suspect, then that other guy's got to be a suspect.
Oh no, no, I
And
see what you're saying.
I think there are two possibilities there. I think he might have actually been after Cecilia Shepard. He might have followed her there or whatever. And he was after her. And because the three girls on the beach, the blonde never looked up for like a long time. And she finally looked up and then he walks away. Like he realizes it's the wrong blonde girl because they were friends with the two kids. So I think he might have been looking for Cecilia and realized that wasn't her. The second reason might be he wanted them to see his face because he could prove he wasn't the killer, and that would confuse things. Like, if there's more than one person involved and this thing was planned, and the obvious, simple reason for him wearing the hood is they filmed it.
Well, you know,
From where? Where do you think the camera was?
the boat.
Could be on the boat, or it could just be somewhere. Once the killer gets the attention of the victims, they're not going to be looking around to see if there's a camera watching. Here's the
Is
funny
Ronald Fong a suspect?
that I don't know. Like, I don't.
I'm mocking you.
Well,
where's
some people have said that maybe he had the camera, but I think Dennis Land is the one who has the camera, and it's Leonard Lake who actually does the deed because it fits right in.
1635. He's got a
Well,
Bolex.
here's the thing: it might have been color.
Tripod.
It might have actually been color, not VHS, color beta. It might have been color Betacam because CBS News in Los Angeles had their brand new truck. It was all portable. Had portable tape deck, portable camera, everything, and a remote truck. That truck was stolen. And
I think you told me that before.
yeah,
I think you
and
told me
that they may have traded. They may have people who stole it never turned up. They found the van, but the camera equipment never turned up. I think it's possible it was videotaped because it would be very difficult to find somebody who would develop your film of your snuff film. Finding a lab to develop that is tough. Video would be crucial. And we know that as soon as he could, Leonard Lake he shot many videos. And he was in it.
So
yeah,
it's broad day. It's broad daylight, right? So it's the only broad daylight attack.
Sunset.
So right.
Right.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Before dark, right? Dusk rather. So what about the fisherman who hears Hartnell and Shepard's screams that actually ends up radioing in the attack, right? Anybody could have gone by and seen his face, but he doesn't put on the mask until he commits to the attack because once the mask is on, you're good. What's this guy doing with an executioner mask on the beach, right? You're gonna stand out. So,
right.
Oh, and my final thing, guys, on the 38 at Presidio Heights. What about the dual-purpose Magnum 38 that fires 9mm rounds?
Maybe that's how the mistake was made.
Those weren't the big 30. Those were 380. Like a Beretta has a much lighter.
That's right. It's the 380.
Yeah, it has a much lighter load. Much lighter load. Probably not a Magnum, just a little 380 Beretta, which was notorious for a hair trigger. I think that there is another possible explanation. Paul Stein was shot by accident by the taxi cab bandit, and because there's powder burns on Paul's hand, like he reached for the gun. Well, that Beretta would have probably gone off.
Also, are you familiar with these chest injuries that Rich mentioned with us, Druzer? The
lungs,
bruises, or lung injuries to Paul Stein's chest.
Yeah, and
really?
the back of his Left hand.
Yeah, so there's some interesting stuff there, Prof.
I didn't know about the bruises on the chest.
See,
I
I
knew about
thought
the
he's-
powder
Not the
burns
chest,
on
inside the
in the
lungs.
lungs.
Yeah.
Wow, that's very interesting.
I thought he stopped the
not
car.
conclusive. It
chest
wasn't
hit the wheel.
conclusive that it
Right.
occurred
Okay.
that night, but
Right.
it's
So
just
he might have
another
been worked
uncertainty.
over and didn't get the hint, and then he got bumped off.
Maybe. Who knows? You sold a book, Professor. You sold one to EV. Shout out to him.
Nice.
It's worth reading. There's no theory in the book except that there's more than one killer. It's not a lone serial killer, and the person writing the letters was not the killer.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to Drew. Go ahead, boys.
When I asked you earlier whether it was just a coincidence or a highly, highly unusual coincidence that there was a killing in Napa dressed up like the Zodiac.
Oh, I don't know.
Situation?
I don't know. I mean, it's funny because Hal Snook knew Dennis Land, who obviously has to be involved somehow. I mean, like, he's so suspicious he's got to be involved. He knew him, he mentored him, blah, 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 blah. Then he commits this crime in Hal's backyard that Hal investigates. All the wing walker shoe prints, all of this stuff is Hal processing this crime scene. How did Hal not know that Dennis Land did it? Like, listen, I don't know. I don't have a complete theory for that.
Oops.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it
said that you said the car door matched Snook's handwriting.
No. The handwriting on the car door. The handwriting. Well, I understand people are confused because Tom Voight likes to put words in my mouth. I never said that's Hal Snook's handwriting on the car door. I said it's Hal Snook's handwriting on the letters. That's not the same. The handwriting on the car door isn't really that similar to the letters. And one of the things I can prove very easily, Hal Snook rotated the paper 180 degrees and wrote part of each letter upside down. Then he would turn the paper over and fill in the blanks. There are 20 different things I can show you that prove this. The person who wrote on the car door is copying the handwriting as it was published in the newspaper. So the person writing on the car door doesn't know that the person writing the letters would turn the car door upside down. He doesn't know that. He's writing the way he sees it in the newspaper with a black felt tip pen. And he has had 8 weeks to practice. And if you just look at it yourself, people, I am a handwriting expert, forgery cases, poison pen cases. If you can't see it yourself, it's an expert's opinion. I can show you, you can see for yourself. There's no magical mystery to handwriting analysis. It's Hal Snook's handwriting. Now, what I show you in the book is a pretty simple comparison. There's way more to it than that. I haven't made any of those videos yet. I didn't know.
Yeah, no, it was interesting.
But no, people don't understand. People think I said things I never said because they haven't read the book. I never said that's Snook's handwriting on the car door. I said it's Snook's handwriting on the original letters. And see, there's the other physical evidence. When they looked for DNA, apparently the letters, like the little list letter, those were licked. The envelopes and stamps were licked. Those first couple of Zodiac letters were not licked. So that's one more clue. You're talking about a different person. So it's
you're making a conclusion about something that you can't.
No. I am drawing a conclusion from several pieces of evidence that all point in the same direction. All the evidence points to multiple letter writers and multiple killers. There is no evidence of any kind that links any two of these murders except supposedly these letters. And really, the only thing that links to Paul Stein murder to Lake Herman Road? Nothing except the letters.
Proves he's a killer. Says he did these other ones. Phone calls before any of it was in the press.
None of it, except that it had already been broadcast on police band radio, which anybody could listen to at this point. Radio Shack sold these. I'm not talking about scanners. If you want to listen to the cops talking back, they're on separate channels. You need a scanner for that. The dispatcher frequency never changes. Every fire truck and cop car gets the dispatcher transmissions. That information had been broadcast in plenty of time. In fact, it's possible that Robert Graysmith could have heard them. And if you time it out, the time it takes him to call Vallejo Police Department and the time it takes him to call Napa Police Department, it looks like he's in Oakland at the Oakland Tribune offices listening to the police radio. And when he hears these broadcasts go out, he runs down to his car, drives up the freeway to Vallejo or drives up the freeway to Napa and makes the phone calls. It turns out to be just about exactly the right number of minutes. That doesn't prove that the person making the phone calls was listening to a radio in Oakland, but that's a very consistent detail.
I do have to say that I've considered the hearing a police broadcast as something that the killer may have done. I mean, this is 2 crimes in a row where the police had just been to the site.
It could have been the killer. It could have been the killer. Well,
I think that's one of Prof's best angle. He's done a good job with the scanning technology and device or whatever.
It could have been the killer, but what I'm saying is there's no evidence that actually proves it was. You couldn't convict somebody of being Zodiac if you had high definition video of the guy making the prank phone call. That doesn't prove he killed anybody, and I can prove that. That's what I'm saying. Just because he made the phone call doesn't prove he was the killer. Might have been the killer, but that doesn't prove.
There's only one problem with the lumbering gate here, folks, at Presidio Heights, because the files, the Rodelli interview with Falk that Druzer and I just deep dived, Falk says that he didn't say anything about a lumbering gate. So I think the lumbering gate might be out as far as the walk. We're at like 2:15, boys. Let's try to wrap if we can.
Time flies.
Any final thoughts? What, Druzer, do you want to have something to rebut, or Prof, do you have a summary?
No, it's too much. There's still so much about the theory that I have not grasped from you.
I don't blame you. We
take it back over to your channel, Prof, with the Buckaroos. Let's get Druzer on with the crew.
Well, and here's the thing: it's not your fault because you're not privy to all the new shit, as he says in The Big Lebowski. I've been sitting on a mountain of evidence I haven't even shown anybody. But it started with this. And then Evan from Texas was the one. I got real busy teaching and doing other stuff. I just forgot about it. There was a book deal, a couple agents, it fizzled out. I just forgot about it. He got Hal Snook's military records. And it just, everything that Zodiac is supposed to be, that's Hal Snook. But I don't see how Hal Snook could have committed at least most of the killings. But his job at Napa. See, here's a big part of the myth, and I'll let you go. One of the lies Graysmith told was that these police departments were not sharing information. That's baloney. They had been actively sharing information on unsolved homicides for a couple of years before Zodiac. So Hal Snook was the designated officer in Napa to receive these reports. So he was receiving these reports. It's not just that somebody reading these reports wrote the letters. Somebody who was receiving the reports soon enough to write the letters.
I read that Lundblad had reached out to other agencies, including Napa, for the Lake Herman Road investigation. So I can see how Snook could get in on there. What I don't see is how he could have gotten information from Vallejo in the month of July.
Because Mel Nikolai had been to this seminar on the new phenomenon of serial killers. So he starts his program in California. He goes around these police departments. You got to start a system. If you have a homicide that isn't solved in a week or so, you make copies of your reports. You send them to the other Bay Area police departments. And they had been doing this for some time. So, and we see some of the reports that we still have the attention Deputy Snook. That was his job. He ran the crime lab. So what they would do is they would send him the ballistics photographs. They would send him copies of the fingerprints because he was a fingerprint expert. He would get all this material. They were already routinely, and it kind of created a situation where you might jump to this conclusion that you have a serial killer. So
in July.
Oh, absolutely.
This happened in July.
Absolutely. Because if you think about it, he doesn't write any letters after Lake Herman Road. But after Blue Rock Springs Park, what is it, less than 4 weeks later, he writes the first letters. In between that time, there's a guy who is arrested and booked for Darlene's murder on July 20th. I've talked to him. I don't think he did the murder because he petty criminal, never in any serious trouble. He didn't do the murder, but he admitted he was holding that gun for somebody that he wouldn't even tell me who it was. So he's still scared of the guy, and the gun had a peculiar defect. It was a Parabellum. It was a
I thought you said it was taped. No, it's a different.
well, the brand name, not a Browning, the German Luger. It was a Luger, but the clip that holds the magazine inside the butt was broken. Somebody dropped the gun and broke it, so they would have to duct tape the clip in the handle of the gun, and for that reason had a tendency to jam. In the middle of the shooting in Blue Rock Springs Park, he stops, walks back to the car. Maybe they switch shooters. Maybe he unjams the pistol, then he walks back and finishes. So I think that pistol might have been the murder weapon because he was set up to get busted that night, and he was set up, I think, to try supposedly take the. Well, anyway, they let him out of jail. He skips town, and then the Zodiac letters start coming in. So, yes, House Snooker's
Vallejo may
giving.
have the book or may have the gun that was used at Blue Rock Springs, and they let the killer go.
Well, the guy who they took it off of bragged about adding it to his collection, but we do know that they sent it off to Sacramento for ballistics comparison, but Vallejo never sent anybody a copy of that report, and they won't let anybody see it now. They will not
There's
let
so
anybody
much
see
we
it.
haven't seen.
That's exactly
There's
right.
all these things where we're gonna follow up here. You should talk
Mhm.
to my sailor boyfriend. You should do this. You should talk to this guy at the oil refinery, and
That's
then
right.
we never see a follow up.
That's
we
right.
we do see evidence of further work being done behind the cases because they've gone to people's houses and they've
Right.
timed the distance, driving times. They're being meticulous. They're not fools.
Right.
But I think Tom Voigt is right that we've only seen a piece of the iceberg.
Well,
Agreed.
and the thing is, those files were the ones that Rodelli got, that everybody's seen. Mel Nikolai had made copies. He asked all the local police departments, send me your Zodiac files. As you have seen, there's not very many San Francisco files. And I think the
No.
biggest reason was I don't think they did much of an investigation because it was Pelicetti. But for whatever reason, they didn't share everything. Vallejo clearly didn't share everything. And then Mel Nikolai made copies and sent them to the FBI. That's how Rodelli got them. Over the years, a few more pages have shaken out. One more thing about Dennis Land. You do know he committed suicide, right?
You're gonna say on
Darlene-
Someone's
Darlene's
birthday.
birthday.
On
yeah.
Darlene's birthday, he committed suicide. So, and it doesn't prove that he committed the murder, but there's in
No,
the files
it
you can
doesn't.
see that he was the prime suspect at the time,
If-
for sure.
An anecdote that always sticks with me is that Paul Stein had shared the same birthday with Arthur Lee Allen.
Sure.
And
See,
even if Arthur Lee Allen was the killer, he probably didn't know that. It's probably a coincidence any way you look at it, and it seems inconceivable. but they're
except for
everywhere through here.
it's synchronicity without a doubt. But I like Drew's theory on it that it's a obviously Drew's theory is it's he figures Cheney, so that it's a threat to Allen from Cheney. I like Drew's angle on that. Might not be for everybody.
We need to do one of these where I'm in Druzer's seat asking Drew Beeson questions, because I will confess I'm way behind on his show. I know more about his DB Cooper work, and so I understand where Druzer's coming from.
Bring up Drew on your show
and bring up
Drew on your
Beeson.
show.
Well, maybe we'll do this. You get
Yeah.
to be the moderator again, and that would be cool. And I just want to thank
Fine by
Druzer
me.
for the patience. You've been very patient.
If the audience
I
is
really
happy
enjoyed
as a
it.
moderator.
It's been great. So
I've wanted to ask you a lot of these questions for years.
read
No,
the book. Read
Druzer
the
requested
book.
prof, so I procured prof. That's what
Yeah.
I'm here for, boys.
I'll be on with Voight. I'll be on with anybody, especially if I'm on some. This is easy for me. I love doing this. This is so much
This was
easier.
respectful, right? We had a nice, friendly
We
Zodiac
did.
true crime conversation
did.
here. A nice
Yeah, we
discussion.
I
Yeah.
felt I
Alright.
was a little abrasive. I cut you off too much.
No,
I'm
you
It's a
sorry.
didn't.
debate. This is the debate series.
Yeah.
It's abrasive.
I got skin this thick, and like I said, I understand the whole world. There's a mountain of stuff that corroborates what's in this book. There was stuff they shot for the documentary they didn't have time for that corroborates what's in this book. They were trying not to take sides. They tried really hard not to take sides when they shot the documentary.
Oh, hey, I want to make that point, Prof, because I know you and Butterfield don't get along greatly, but you still allowed him to push back on your theory.
Oh, I didn't. That wasn't my idea.
But they used your title, though. I'm sure if you had a massive problem
and
with
listen,
it, you could have drew the line. You could have drew the line, right?
Listen,
So,
Voight has agreed several times and chickened out every time. I will applaud Butterfingers for having the guts to try, but I also noticed that he'll explain things like he's the one who figured this out, and I'm like, no, Butterfingers, I'm the one who pointed this out to you. He's one of the ones. He altered some of those documents. He withheld some of those documents.
You got to save that for your show, Prof. He's
okay,
never going to come on here.
Right.
If I let you do that, he's never going to come
right.
on here with me.
Well, forget I said anything. Just vault that.
You just said it
I wish
live,
Butterfield was around when I joined. I think he sort of left the scene just as I was coming on. So I've never.
He agreed to come on, Mike. You're always welcome to come on the show. I think the next one's going to be Rudelli. I think Drew's going live, guys. I don't want to step on Drew's toes. I got to
go. Oh yeah. Okay. Well, thank you guys both very much.
Thank
nice
you very much, Prof.
Druzer.
You're the man.
Yeah. Great questions, Druzer. Those were great questions.
Thank you. Miller's Crossing is my favorite film.
There you go. Good
film.
Cheers, boys.
Well, we got to do a movie show one of these days, boys. We're doing a super show.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Zodiac Files Debate Series Volume 2. I will do my outro. Thank you, Prof. I'll drop you. Get his book.
All right.
Check out the doc on Peacock. It's on everywhere, Doc. They added you to some new ones. Peacock and where else can they get it?
It was on Oxygen, Peacock, and I don't know where else. Whatever NBC Universal owns. It also depends on what country you're in.
ThomasHenryHoran.com. Get the subscription to the Prof's what are you calling that? Your subscription shows? Are you doing the full shows there?
Yeah, the Stones Unturned podcast.
The Stone Unturned podcast.
Right. StonesUnturned.com or ThomasHenryHoran.com. It's $9.99 a month. You do have to pay. But you'll see all the stuff that I haven't been able to show the public recently. You see that on the premium channel. But I will be doing more free episodes, filling in blanks on the Zodiac case like we tried to do tonight with video, with pictures. I'll be doing that on the Myth of the Zodiac Killer YouTube channel. If you just Google Thomas Henry Horan, you'll find it. Myth of the Zodiac Killer YouTube channel. There will be some free episodes about Zodiac for sure.
So you got two channels. It's Stones Unturned, and you have a Myth channel as well?
Right.
Okay.
The Myth of the Zodiac Killer channel is kind of dedicated. I promised NBC I would fill in blanks. When they were through showing the documentary, I would make follow-up episodes that show what we're trying to explain verbally tonight. So I'll be doing that in the near future too. Those will be free.
Outstanding, sir. Yeah, I tapped into your channel there, and they were feeling your responses. I don't think they were as welcoming to myself as Druzer's perspectives pushing back on you, but Prof has a thick skin. He doesn't care. He doesn't care if I push
those
back
animals. Those animals. Don't worry about those animals. They're all right. That's why they're called buckaroos. They're animals. Don't worry about it.
They're following your image, sir. Okay, boys, I'm going to take us out. Thank you very much, Prof. You're the man.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it, man. Have a good night. You're the man. Thank you.
Good night.